All right, good afternoon, everyone. It is Tuesday, January 30th at 3 p.m. So I'll officially call this work session to order. We're going to do a roll call, and what we do for work sessions is we go around the entire table so that everybody who's listening knows who all is a part of the discussion today. So I'll start, and then we'll go around this way, if that's okay today. So Carly Hoover, the Director of District 1,
I'm Andrew Mon, I'm the Director of Special Education.
Jeff Baker, Executive Director of CTE Data and Technology Services.
Charlie Simpson, District 3.
Amy Conley, Chief Financial Officer.
Dr. Constantine, Interim Superintendent, Number 4, Executive Assistant.
Joy Valentino, Executive Director of Business and Operations at the Puget Sound ESD.
Greg Woodard, Finance Support.
Dave Larson, District 5.
Justin Weinstein, Puget Sound ESD Assistant Fiscal Officer.
Allison Dino, Central School District, Executive Director of Multilingual Services and Pre-K Education.
And Scott Whitbeck, Chief Academic Officer with the district.
Naomi Virgo with Tocqueville School District as the Director of Communications and Community Engagement.
All right, and welcome to all of our guests that are joining us online. I know that we are getting into some really important and desirable topics. So welcome to anyone who's listening now or in the future. I just want to take a quick second to thank the PSCSD, one, for being here today. Thank you so much for what you're going to offer us, and then also for hosting us in y'all's one of y'all's conference rooms. As everyone listening probably knows, we had a flood due to some frozen pipes in our admin building. So we're out of the boardroom for quite a while. So we'll be kind of in random places for our meetings for the next few months. So thanks again for hosting us. So we'll take just a moment to open up for public comment. So this is something that we wanted to make sure we had at our work sessions to provide opportunity for folks to contribute, ask questions that may then could possibly be addressed as we're going through our presentations and our discussions. So only just a moment, if you are joining virtually, you can offer public comment by raising your hand or enter your name in the chat. Seeing none, we definitely encourage, again, if you're joining or listening late to this recording later, if you do have questions, ideas, thoughts, please definitely direct those to the TSD board as well as superintendent. All right, so with that, we'll kick off with the Washington State Budget 101. And I think that is you.
That is. I'll stand, but it's not an attempt to overpower the conversation or use my loud voice. It's more because I think better on my feet. As a presenter, I'm able to do that. But first of all, I have to introduce the woman behind every good man. And that is my boss. She, of course, Jolie is the executive director, and we together form an excellent finance team here at ESD. And she is going to support. This is more of a roundtable discussion because I can vary you in finance in a heartbeat. It's way too complex. The system has taken me 20 plus years to know. And coming from Idaho, where I thought I understood a system, then I stepped into Washington and basically got lost for 5 years at least. And thank goodness I had some great mentors along the way. But again, if you missed it, I'm Justin Lansing. I'm the Assistant Fiscal Officer here at Puget Sound ESD. And my role is really to support schools in finance. So I review all of your legal documents, your legal requirements, as well as all of your financials for accuracy, as well as I work with the legislature on different legislative initiatives. And then the newest addition to my skill set is binding conditions. And of course, that brings us to our current state of Tocqueville. And as you know, there are 2 other districts in the state that have gone through the process and are actually further along in the process. Your binding condition was triggered by a F-196, which is a year-end financial. And that's the first time this state has ever seen a binding condition triggered by a year-end financial. So that's a little different. We're still just kind of getting to know that process. I don't have a lot of information on that today. Of course, I'm working with Amy and Greg and Quincy on all of that, and we're doing an awesome job. Just know that there are a lot of moving pieces behind the scenes that we're trying to keep you up with. So I'm gonna go through the accounting nuts and bolts. Anytime stop me if you're confused, because most likely others will be confused. This is a massive concept, And in the state of Washington, it is a lot different than in perhaps other states or other systems that you might have. So, should I just, next slide, is that the best? Okay, I'll just do next slide then. So we're gonna go over revenue sources. Where do schools get their money? How is money driven to a school district? Then we're gonna talk about enrollment and staffing. Building budgets are always a hot topic. So whenever I speak to a board, usually I end up spending the most time talking about how do we get the money to our buildings? Because those are the individuals you're hearing from, right? Those are the ones that say, we need support, we have to have this or our students don't get X. That's the challenge. So we're gonna talk a little about that. And then always a hot topic for our community is the co-curricular and ASB. No matter what, we have to talk about that. And it's a really difficult conversation. And what you're doing today is really starting to formulate opinion and thought about the philosophy of the board when it comes to these programs. Because you as a board have to come together and agree on how we're gonna move forward, or the district doesn't move forward. And that's the biggest challenge. That's the negotiation point that everybody wants to do, but it's the hardest thing to do. And it's because we all have feelings. So I'm trusting that the board directors all have kids in the district, students in the district, or have had students in the district. Well,
I've got an 11-month-old, so.
okay, so that one's coming right up. We
Yeah.
better fix the system before that one.
That's right.
We're gonna fix it. Today starts a brand new day. So if you'll go to the next slide for me, we'll start to talk about revenue. So as you know, the state has revenue, right? And if you're familiar with the McCleary Act 2 years ago, the state switched from a funding model that was more locally based to a statewide funding model. Now, whether you agree with it or not, there's a lot of choice words that I could say about it, but I will refrain because this is a public meeting. The idea is that the state apportionment model sets a foundation through a set of ratios to fund each school district. That's the apportionment model. And I'm going to go into the apportionment model a lot more. In other states, it's a per pupil flat amount. But ours is based upon, keyword here, prototypical model. We built a fake school out there, and we applied a whole bunch of ratios to the fund to make it very, very complex. And then he said, based upon the number of students going to those schools, you get this ratio, you get this ratio, you get this ratio. And then it all boils down in a lot of magic to a number. Let me tell you, I've seen the system now this way, and I've seen it in a per pupil model. I'm not sure what's best, because they both have their problems. What I love about the state of Washington is the transparency we show in every calculation. Except for ghosting, which I'm not even gonna go there today because that was 10 years ago and we don't deal with that anymore and it's gone. But the idea is we can be transparent with what factor or what student factors are driving the apportionment model. So then you have LEA, which is your local levy, your EP&O levy, as we call them. I know a number of districts are out for the February soon, very soon, 13th. So that is the local funding level, sometimes up to 23% of your local. And we're going to talk more after this, but a lot of the discussion is what's called a levy lid. And you probably advocated for it in the legislature. There's a lot of movement on it right now, talking about those on the I-5 corridor that got regionalization and might want to use their full levy lid. And we're saying those are the entitled ones, right? And so we're fighting for everyone, not just the entitled ones. It happens. We're going to continue to have this discussion because local taxpayers want to pay for schools. That's the whole thing. So let them pay for schools. We just don't know how to make it equitable within the state. And that's why the state came in and put maximums on what you can collect locally from your community. So those dollars are really kind of challenging for us, because we can go out there and in some cases maximize. You might have had a brand new subdivision come in that's worth billions of dollars, and you could levy your local tax rate through your school and get that, but your levy lid is saying, sorry, you reached your maximum. That's what's frustrating. And we continue to work on that legislation. So if you've been to the Hill, I heard a number of people are on the Hill. We just wrote, there's 2 great bills out there right now that I'm following and have done a lot of work on for regionalization costs, saying this is not fair. Let's open this up. Let's get back to a formula where our communities can enrich our schools. Unfortunately, the change that they're proposing is not going to be significant for US Tukwila or many other districts. It's just not there yet. I do think we'll see movement in the next biennial, but not right now. So that's your state. Then we have federal. Let me tell you, I love federal funds. But federal funds are the least fun to deal with because they have red tape. And if you could roll a whole roll of tape out, you would say that's not enough regulation, so we're going to use 2 more rolls. And then you're going to do twice the paperwork for it. And then you're going to get the money, but it's always going to be 30 to 60 days later, which creates a heck of a cash problem, especially for our Title I funds, right? We have a big Title I pool. We can't afford to pre-spend that, because guess what? We have to apply for it after. Or if we apply for it ahead, we have to do all the groundwork to justify the expenditure. Federal funds are wonderful, but they come with red tape. So remember, federal funding is great. ESSER was great, right? Does everybody remember those great ESSER funds? I love them. That was like a little Christmas present. Now we're having to deal with them. Then, of course, I talked a little bit about local property tax, timber, and forest. We have very little timber or forest anymore. That used to be our candy bar. That used to be the money we would get and say, oh, that's a great savings account. As we all know, timber industry isn't as successful in the state of Washington anymore. And federal forest funds are not being utilized the way they were. They're actually being diverted. So we're not getting a lot of that. So those are the 3 main areas. You're good. Wow, that's fine. I just should have talked after. Okay, there we go. And there we go. Okay. As you can see, from this small chart, and many of you found this electronically, so you can look at it, but this is just per pupil financing, and you can see total revenues, or is the blue line. Then you can see state revenues, those as a portion, of course, local, and then federal, and then your other revenues or other federal and state revenues. So you get the idea of how your total per pupil revenue is driven mostly by state, right? Because that's that apportionment model. Then it goes down and it says, hey, other state revenues. Then you look at your federal and your others. So next slide, please. Okay. You're doing great. You really are. It really helps you just keep going. So I'm here to tell you about the budget, right? We're here, we need to develop a budget. A budget is a guess. The problem with guesses is they have to be educated. And they have to be precise enough to appease OSPI and the ESD. So my job as an ESD fiscal officer, and part of what Jolie does, is we review your financials for validity. Does it fit within a plus or minus scale? Does the ratio that you're using for revenue look at your past trend plus your current trend, or vice versa? And so we look at a lot of that, but to do that, we have to set a very aggressive timeline. The biggest challenge with developing a budget is the timeline, sticking to the timeline, because it goes so fast. As you can see, we're still in session. This is a short session, right? We're going to be done in March. That doesn't mean we get to wait till March. Usually by March, I would suggest you have at least 2 versions of the budget built for the next fiscal year. That's giving you enough time to review all of your reduction in force. It's giving you enough to amp up, republicize your class sizes, and if any changes need to be made to the actual models, that you've made changes significant to the models that you know and anticipate what's coming. Because an uninformed community is a pissed off community. Does anybody know that? Does that resonate with anyone? I hate to say it that way, but it truly is. Because if we can tell the public This is our scenario. We're trying to think of every scenario. What are your thoughts, public? Taxpayer, what do you think? What is a priority? That can be done with a survey. And we did a multi-choice or a forced choice survey. A forced choice survey requires you to answer multiple times what's a priority. So it pairs, let's say, your grounds and maintenance to basketball, and then it also pairs that same thing multiple times. What it does is it forced choices a ranking of hierarchy. And when the public comes back to you and you say, this is our forced ranking, it looks really great to show that our public has had input on what is the priority. Now, you can do it a number of different ways. I'm not telling you that's the only way. That's the way I found most successful. And it was cheap because it was in Google. So that's one of the ways I did it. It was really simple, but the timeline gives you enough timeline to basically start to look at what is your enrollment scenarios. I'm going to talk about enrollment very quickly. Remember I said all of those ratios that we put the numbers through? We have to know and estimate every single person, every single student, special ed student, any student that is going to, as far as go to free and reduced lunch, we have to know those numbers so that we can plug them into a model to project the money, right? As the legislature finishes, OSPI issues a tool called the F203. That is your revenue estimator. We're in there thousands of times. Matter of fact, we have one built for what they're proposing on the Hill right now. And we can plug data into that and we get the numbers. We get that revenue, right? That apportionment revenue. The problem is when we start using those to project, and then there's small tweaks in it, it takes the whole system. You basically have to start again and redo the cycle. So we're cautious to say we love to play revenues and scenarios, but it is very time consuming for your fiscal staff. I would only do 7 renditions of a budget. I don't know fully how many of you guys did, but our system was all in hand. And I said, I will only do 7. I'm gonna do a House model with all the House bills in it, a Senate model. I'd do a one conference, and I would do one as what's called a rollover budget. That was exactly like last year, but just rolling everybody within the union group to the next level, the next salary levels, all of those things that are required by law. Those were, then those went to the board. That was at my March meeting, and then we went from there. Now, Amy, I'm not suggesting you don't have enough to do, and you should do 8 or 9, but maybe you want to ask for 8 or 9. I'm just kidding. No, it's a lot of work. And then some of our models now, we actually can get the data much faster than an Excel spreadsheet. But keeping in mind, we do have to have RIF notifications for staff by May 15th, no later than May 15th. You have to have your plan in place prior to that. There are ramifications for that. Keep that in mind. The other thing is, as soon as that enrollment scenario, and I'll talk a little bit more about your different enrollment scenarios, are done, and you have settled as a board on class size with the help of administration, it's really key that we start looking for what are the potential savings that are critical. Meaning, what is the priority? How is the program going to be sustained here? Because this is a more priority. And that starts to really come out in the overall direction. So this again is just an idea. We do have to have something by May 8th, May 15th, of course. The final date, July 10th, is when I have to see it. And then sometimes I go back and I say, let's redo this part, or can I help with this part? Or they just say, hey, I need some more help. That happens. But I'm also happy to review with you guys as you move closer to that and work with Amy and Greg as they move forward. So next slide, please. So we'll talk about money, right? Money is enrollment, and there are different methods. I'm going to go through those methods. The hardest part about enrollment, and I don't know, maybe I can't remember because I work with so many districts, but this year were you guys really close to your projected enrollment?
We're fortunate, we're over.
Okay, well, that is a bonus. Because one of our districts had 303 less students than they projected. That triggers a whole nother problem. And they had staff. They were lucky enough to find staff for all those positions. So they're in a different position where they had hired And they unfortunately have very low class sizes, below 17, below 22. Those are extreme problems, but they're now seeing a similar type of problem. So all of this to say enrollment is key, right? Enrollment is key, and we must know that, and we can do that. Staffing is your next big hurdle. That's setting your class sizes, setting what is the idea, or what does the framework look like for you, and what is critical to the mission of the students in the district versus can we do better, right? So no one is saying we have to do with none. What we're saying is we have to be more efficient and we have to find new ways. Because financially, the dollars aren't there to support the system as it is, right? It doesn't mean the system's terrible. It's probably an excellent system if it was fully funded. The challenge is we just don't have the money. The state's not giving us the checkbook anymore to write the checks. That means we have to prioritize. What is the priority? That's the difficult thing. You're going to hear MSOP in this presentation, of course, those material supplies and other operating costs. I did a tremendous amount of analysis on this, but this is where your building budgets come in. Your co-curricular budgets, sports, we're seeing a lot of changes in this. I was just on a meeting today where they were saying we're wiping all C teams and our JV teams are only going to travel within X number of miles. I'm not suggesting that that's appropriate for you. What I'm saying is everybody is looking at those costs and saying, we really want to continue our co-curricular activities. How do we afford them? And then finding a method to do that, because it's really a great question. And then, of course, let's talk insurance for a minute. Insurance is not getting cheaper. And with that pipe, sure as heck won't get cheaper, right? I mean, that's the first thing you do. You don't turn in the car claim where you hit something because you don't want your insurance to go up. Well, that's not how it works in public education. We got to turn that in, we got to make our building right. The problem is statewide insurance premiums are going up. It's not just you. On average, they went up 33% in 1 year. And we have the data, we actually presented that in a white paper too. And actually, I think Greg and Amy are probably going to chat about that a little later on. So next slide, please. Okay, so there's 3 methods of enrollment. You can do all of these scenarios. You can also look at K-12. Design does an excellent job at mapping this out. If you do not have an internal demographer that wants to carry this, but the cohort straight roll-up is what we used for years. That means if there were 12 in the 3rd grade at this elementary, there's going to be 12 in this grade and that elementary, 12 in the 4th grade next year, right? Straight roll-up. The second one that's more reliable is the cohort survival rate, which is taking the prior year percentage and rolling them up to the next grade level. That means if you lost 2% between 3rd and 4th grade, you're going to always lose 2 to 4%. I really encourage you looking at that. It happens all the time. I'm telling you, I do not like the straight up method, but I also have built a budget on straight up method and been proven wrong. So 3-2-1 weighted average previous 3 years. I worked for an amazing boss who required me to do a tremendous amount of work, and she did 3% up, 5% up, 2% down, 7% down. So we had 5 enrollment projections, all based on percentage roll-up of cohorts. And then each school got to go through their staffing projection based upon that. But then what was interesting is that principal had to have conversations about who was going to be internally transferred for a contract when they didn't meet those. So we put individuals on notice that said, this is contingent upon enrollment, but you might become a roving substitute because we don't know where else we have it. Those are all things that you have to go through to say, we want to do the best thing for our students, but we don't have the data in front of us until we see the whites of their eyes. And that is the biggest challenge that we face in enrollment. So obviously, we want to look at revenue, we want to look at staffing, expenditures. 85%, 85 to 87% of your budget is staffing and benefits. You don't have a choice on it. So that is going to be the enrollment, setting your class size by classroom, and then also taking a look at your specialty classes at your high schools. Because we know certain classes, like a PTE class, is not going to generate a full classroom. But can we afford to run it for 7 students? because it's a great opportunity? The answer could be, well, maybe we'll combine woodworking 1, 2, and 3 in the same, and we're gonna have to do 3 co-curricular in one period, and we can get that to 12 students. Those are the options, but those are hard discussions. And working in a master schedule is clearly impossible. It is, it's crazy, but it can be done. And it has been done. It's just we can't be everything to everyone at once. I started a program for HISER certification in Olympia. I loved it. Our students could go in, get certified to run HISER in any community. They could run it for all the great companies around. Problem was, every other year I could start a new group in. So I had to say, I'm gonna park the HISER for 1 year, and then next year we'll come back to it. Because that gave us enough time to rotate HISER 1 and HISER 2 through the program for certification. Tough.
Yeah, big questions as you go.
Absolutely, please.
So the problem that we have, none of these methods work when you have exogenous events like a whole bunch of asylum seekers show up at your door
Yeah.
today
Or tomorrow.
or next week.
Or you have a school move in.
Yeah.
Or you have a private school open.
Which, I mean, the whole issue of refugees and so forth has been a major issue in our district for years.
Absolutely.
And there's really very little way to predict that.
Absolutely. So one of the things that I do is really sort out what is the transient community, what is the enrollment of the transient community, right? Whether it's the asylum seekers, whether it's workers, we had a lot of seasonal workers that came in, and we had a huge challenge with that, much like our friends over in Yakima, they have a tremendous amount. We built a budget excluding some of those, and then we looked at that population separately within the flow chart, and we add portions of that back in where it's reasonable to fill class size, but then when it's not, the board is making the decision to say, I think it's important that we look at that and we're gonna make the decision on that. We're looking at those birth rates. You're not gonna know. Quite frankly, we never know. The one place you don't wanna be is overestimating it. So it's hard and it is a challenge for educators to come in late to the session and say, we need to hire teachers, but guess what? It's part of what we have to do now because an overfunded system is a bankrupt system. And the challenges, it used to be, we'd have a couple waiting on the wings and I'll have some holes here and there and I can fill that with a FTE and move them around. That's not the case anymore. Because we're funded on a different model. I'm gonna talk about how the state changed their funding, right? It used to be, we paid a teacher X, we got X. Now, we pay a teacher X, they give us the average of Ys from the state. In an experienced district, it hurts you a ton. It hurt me to the point of 3.9 million. That can really affect what we're doing. And I think that changed our scope too, not only the Clery Act and the full funding, but we changed the model. And the model has no longer that leniency to deal with what you're speaking of.
I mean, there's a ton of problems with the model, but there's a whole big, huge problem with the equity in the financial model. And in a district like ours that has all the high needs, poverty, ELL, I mean, we just get totally screwed over, which is why we're where we are.
Absolutely. You, because of your district, you are seeing an extreme amount of, in my opinion, programs that require a lot of funding that are not funded to the full intent, right? So we're not receiving revenue to offset the impact of those programs.
I would say they're funded to the full intent that the legislature intended.
Yes,
The
okay.
legislature is messed up in terms of how much.
Well, I think that's a fair statement. I really do. I think that's a really hard challenge that we face.
Right.
And we move incremental. We move these tiny little amounts, but we never fix it, right? And then we see that same problem. So I echo your frustration and concern. So, I mean, enrollment is key. This is the hardest work. This is the most work. Next slide. So I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on here, but understanding those ratios are key. Amy and Greg, of course, are working with these ratios constantly. Constance works with these as she starts to put class sizes together and what is the board's idea of effective class sizes? And what do we generate based upon the actual staffing levels at our students? So you can easily figure out at an elementary, the prototypical, that's that ratio, they say is 400 students. To be effective, we have to have 400 students, and you'll get 1.253 principals. I'm still trying to find the 0.253 principal, but I'm working on that. Teacher librarians, you only get 0.663, so I don't know how that's gonna work either. Teaching assistants, you see that ratio, that's the ratios generated. That is why we're working so hard with the legislature, because we talk about an unfunded mandate. We talk about how the heck are we gonna put 0.663 of a teacher librarian in an elementary with 400 students? That's not realistic. It's the same thing with nursing, and I worked on nurses because it's a personal thing during COVID. I said, how are we supposed to handle and contain COVID when we don't have a nurse at every one of our buildings? That was a tough one for me. And we generated 3.5 nurses in Olivia with 10,000 kids. That was it. Now, that has changed a lot, and we used our COVID money, but you get the idea that the ratios are hard. Over here, you can see that class size 17, 17, 17, 17. Kindergarten, of course, we get that incentive, right? The legislature said, we give you money if you're at 17, right? Remember that? That was that unfunded mandate that they gave us, but they said, we're only gonna give you this little amount of money, right? So we figured it out. In 3 of our schools, we actually didn't even take the money. We decided we couldn't do the 17 kids because it wasn't worth the money. It cost me more to do it than that ratio. Did the kids suffer? Absolutely not. The educational value was there still, but you have to make those financial choices. Sometimes they're like that. You see the lab science. The nice part is we finally have a factor in the state of Washington for planning time. That was something I thought, and I worked really hard because they actually subtracted that planning time out of there for people in Idaho, which is really different. So I'm thankful in the state of Washington that we can do that. So are there questions on the ratios? Now, this is a snapshot. This comes from what's called the John Jeanette sheet. This is a summary sheet that we can print. You can go out to OSPI. They have the new one out there right now. They're excited to put, as I'm talking tomorrow, we can put the first layer of numbers in there, which I'm excited to see and start running these models, but these are the ratios that are published. Questions?
I would just point out the ridiculousness of that last line, parent involvement for kids.
Yeah.
That's like 0, 0, 0. We have, what, 7 community liaisons based on our variety of ethnic communities, and it's just, that's one of the most ridiculous numbers I've ever seen in my life.
And you'll see in a few minutes, the social emotional.
Yeah.
We're so big into that right now, but yet this is our ratio. Are you kidding me?
Right.
Well, how do you think about counselors, the academic counselors, they're not even.
Nope. I mean, it's really, we call the prototypical model the unspoken model now, because it's not real. And if they want the real model, I think we have to start advocating for it, and we are doing a lot of that. It's just how do we change this model? Because we can't get away from it right now. There are areas where we're making improvements, but it's a tough one.
Yeah, there was, in Olympia yesterday, there's a lot of discussion going on around coming up with a new model. That's a multi-year thing, but
Yeah.
anyway, it's finally sinking in down there in the years.
Yeah.
I mean, 30, they didn't want to talk about it for 5 years, and now it's finally occurred to them that this current model doesn't work.
I think so. I think you're right. And the impact now that they're seeing is these schools that are having financial concerns because of more than one specialty group that we're trying to serve. It's not necessarily those big schools that are have very few, high poverty kids. It's those kids, districts like yourself, that have multiple situations and multiple communities that you're trying to appeal to. That's why I think it's so important that we're out there and advocating. It has been, I get more questions on how are we going to change the model than I do on the bills that are actually there, which is really interesting to me, but I love it. Any discussion is good discussion. I just wish that it was faster. Next slide. Okay, here's the social emotional. I just mentioned this because there's a phase in, so we're going to be phasing in to be 23, 24, right? We're in that one, and then as you move to 24, 25, elementary, middle school, and high school. And of course, this is the same number of students. So we're generating more. It is more of a significant commitment to us. But did I tell you about unfunded mandates? Because this comes with compliance. If you don't meet it, you don't get it. That's the problem. Whenever there's an initiative that has compliance attached to it, we're doing extra paperwork to prove that we're doing it, or you don't get it. I work really hard with districts to make sure that we're getting it. And when I see, hey, we can make this change, we'll do it. And I'm really happy to say, you guys expedite that all the time. I mean, you're working very hard to make sure that's done. But keeping in mind, this is one of those funded, but you definitely have to be compliant to get the money. So
I would also point out that, yeah, the ridiculousness of that social worker, talking about social emotional, every one of those numbers rounds to 0.
yeah. Isn't that awesome?
It just completely goes to show that people that are making policy don't actually understand the core components of what social emotional learning is, which is like consistency of supportive adults, right? And supportive people. It's just,
And I think it goes one more step in my hand. When they develop this table, they backed into a number.
Yeah.
Statewide, that's how these ratios were divided. They said we have X number of dollars in this area and we're gonna divide it that way, and that's how these came up. This is not driven by actual people in the seats helping our students. This is driven by a financial model, because that's the model that we're governed by at this point, and we don't know how to transition to a real person model yet. That's the key. That's what we're all facing. It's hard to do.
And I think it's interesting, we were yesterday talking about the paraeducator proposal and how it's just the equity focus. It's not even equity, just as equal, equity versus equal, but this equal application based on enrollment. And then one school district that is very high, I say low SEL, I'll reverse that, low. We're saying that how that'll actually impact them adversely in their certificated staffing. And I'm like, well, give it to me. You know, right? Like honestly, because we have that need. And so it's not based on an equity model. It's based on an equal model, which is not serving us at all.
Yeah, that's the thing I always bring up, let's say, so social workers are allocated, the school with 5% poverty gets the exact same number of social work allocation of social workers as the school with 90% poverty. That is total nonsense.
It is. And then they say, use your lab funding, right?
Yeah.
And that's the first thing they say,
Yeah.
or use your Title I funding.
Yeah.
And you're saying, but I'm already using that because I need teachers to instruct the students, but I also need to meet your social emotional.
Right.
That's the real conversation. Unfortunately, ratios don't have a real conversation, but it's part of the challenge. Next slide. So this is some examples of, basically allocations, for 550, enrollment for an elementary. Here's what it allocates. These are the summaries. What I usually would do is bring to the board those staffing policies and decisions on class size and say, this is what we're generating from the state formula, and this is how I proposed our staffing levels. So what you're seeing now is maybe we're not gonna get 1.72 principals, but maybe we're gonna do 1 principal and a team of students, and then we're going to look down and we will round that to 1.0, right, for a librarian, because we know we're gonna need that. And we're going through this then and deciding the priorities that we're going to have. And then I work towards an average cost, including benefits for each one of these areas. So I go through a district budget and say, hey, a teacher might be worth 110,000 total with benefits and salary. I don't know, I'm making that up because that was 10 years ago when I was in the chair. But you know, and then we apply simple math to those expenditures and see, are we coming up with about the percentage of the cost for salary? That's a budget big picture, and we do those all the time. We do them in our sleep. We do them when we're planning before the budget presentation. We do them daily. You live and breathe the stress of how we're gonna make the budget balance when we start to see these ratios. Here's the 1,200 enrollment high school, of course, 960 DEA and 240 CTE. Keep in mind that CTE is going to be education first, right? So the formula with CTE is just an enhancement dollar, but they're still generating DEA dollars for every one of those FTEs. And a lot of times we get confused that CTE money is CTE money, but it's really, they are DEA first, and then they have an enhancement that is CTE driven. So we have to make sure that we're still paying for our admin assistants, we're still paying for our counselors, we're still paying for all those things that are allowed under CTE. And that is a hard thing to do, a hard conversation, but we're getting better with those conversations.
It's actually an interesting secret little thing that I discovered years ago.
Yeah,
We actually, you say enhancement, CPE is actually going to decline for guidance counselors.
absolutely.
It's stuck it back from us, which, again, I mean, I'm sure somebody did that because they were looking for some dollars, something else in their budget, but that's just completely.
The ratio actually within the CTE formula is a deduction for the number of students per counselor size grade.
Which makes.
It's to balance the allocation, which I never have figured out why we needed a negative number in there in the first place, but somebody needed money.
Yeah, somebody has continued to provide budget providers.
Yeah.
For the last 10 years. And
Oh, yeah, it's still,
nobody can tell me why that makes any sense.
I don't think you, I didn't want to put it, probably,
Oh, no, sorry, that was just a me of y'all coming in and it was all over my head.
yeah, you were all over, okay,
Yeah.
we're back now. So the idea here is, of course, keeping in mind that these formulas obviously drive then the 85% of your budget that is going to be your salary and your benefits. And that enrollment projection here is dictated by those class sizes that you as a board set and say we're going to agree to. That is the board's priority for what programs and what if it is a district-wide program, if it's a school-based program, how we're going to staff that, and then ultimately the staffing for how are we going to ensure the education of our students within our district. Next slide. So I talked a little bit about the funding of staff. So when I first joined the state, of course, if a teacher made $101,000 in salary, they paid us $101,000 plus the benefits from the state or what was portioned for them. Now they pay everybody, no matter what, in the certificated instructional staff, $72,728, and you get 22.98. Maintenance fringe, 22.34, fringe increase and insurance rate of flat 1,046. So what they did is they removed the incentive for districts to hire and retain senior teachers. And what that did was create quite a big problem with staffing. Because we had many teachers, and now a program manager might say, well, I'm gonna hire a brand new teacher because we get the same amount of money. So it created an HR problem there. So yeah, I remember, yeah, it is a problem. It is a problem. We have this discussion a lot, but we're still hiring the most qualified candidate. No matter what, and that's important, but you can see how the state changed that salary schedule. And now how we as districts, we're just told to respond. You just gotta deal with it. And it hurt really, really bad when that model changed. But this is the model, this is how we are funded for staffing. And these are driven by those ratio and formulas that you saw in the prior two slides. So you generate those, it pops through this formula, and it comes with that magic formula.
Can you explain a little bit what fringe maintenance?
Sure.
Fringe increase are?
Sure, so maintenance benefits, so we have like a basic benefit package like a Medicare, all of that kind of stuff. And those are, you know, our standard taxes. And so the state puts a package of that together and then they come up with a percentage. And they say that's fringe benefit maintenance. So that's the maintenance every day that we need to keep them going. Then they say your insurance package is tiered, right? And then for inflation purposes, an additional multiplier is applied to it to give us an increase for DRS or for changes in DRS is the biggest one, retirement services changes, unemployment changes a lot, sometimes we have. The idea is they didn't want to tell districts because they wanted to have local bargaining agreements dictate how benefits were spent. So if they wanted to contribute $125 to VIVA instead of X, they could. Then say SEP came along. Does anybody remember that transition? And we were told what we were going to do, and we were told what benefits. It threw this model out the window. This used to be free money that we could apply at a bargaining table to offer enhancements for teachers. Now, it's merely conversation to say, great, we'll absorb another increase for DRS this year. It is not what it intended to be, and we've never changed the language at the legislative level. So it's a great question because it does not make sense now at all. Now we're told what to do, what to pay, how to pay it, and we're saying if you want these, you can elect to have those, but they're going to pay it. And it even tells us, hey, if they get 660 hours, You get to pay full year benefits for them, so congratulations. That's a major problem. I just did a lot of white papers on that and how much we're additionally spending on just substitutes that are more working 660 days. We're looking at $12.5 million just in Puget Sound ESC district that we're having to pay. But we knew it. We knew it was gonna happen. We predicted it. I was in that roundtable where we said changing this is going to predict that. It didn't change the outcome.
The other issue is substitutes that not just us, but when they instituted paid family medical leave.
Oh, yeah.
Are this, I mean, they only pay us for 4 substitutes a year. And we're at 24. And, you know, that's a statewide, somebody ran some numbers, that's like a $3 million hit on school district.
You know, that's a turkey, that's the first thing I worked on for about 12 days. So yeah.
So, and we were talking to legislators that yesterday, I've been trying to make them aware of that for months, and they're just kind of like.
Especially if you give, they're entitled to 1 sick day a month. Hello? And then we have personal days on top of it, and then we have internal shifting, because we're going to go to those things and we need to take kids to those activities. 4 days is nothing. You might as well not even get it.
So it's no wonder that school districts are going broke.
Absolutely. One of the reasons. Yeah, okay, next slide. All right, other staffing, of course, this is where the big challenges come, and this really comes in your federal and your state programs where you have to look at program specific. Remember, I talked to you about the enrollment at a building and setting those class sizes. That's pretty structured. We can do that. The challenge is now, how do we project our lab personnel? What programs are our priority and how are we going to staff them? That is key, right? We're talking about transitional bilingual, articulate intelligence, special education. Special education is the biggest buzzword around, because guess what? We just hire a para when we say we have a problem, right? Or they say, no, they have to get an IEP. And the minute they get an IEP, what do we say? Oh, it must be a one-on-one. And I would say to the business office, and I just put my head down and I'd say, well, I guess, I don't know, you wanna not buy my gas today? I don't know what to say. I don't know how to do this. And then we started coming up with a rubric of how are we going to work on this? Because every student coming through the IEP process was a one-on-one. That's a huge problem, but in some cases it was necessary, and I didn't know it was some people. Because have we heard this before, and how do we contain it? It's the same problem every district has. So we start talking about what qualifies. How do we set up a rubric at the district level to say our IEPs have to meet the standard? And the local education team looks at that standard and says, I agree. That's a challenge. But it can be done. CTE, great, just make sure you're factoring in those periods into your high school schedule as if they were filled periods. So do not exclude them when looking at your class sizes, include them in your basic ed class sizes. A lot of people think this is additional funding that goes on top. No. Make sure they're included in that whole thing. So that's your CTE note. Federal title, these are really difficult programs, specifically because the grant driven, you are already staying in a contained vessel. Right? Great? Okay. Yeah, because I saw a little bit of non-containment, but we're gonna contain that. Right, Amy? We're gonna contain those. See, we have an agreement?
Yes.
Yeah. I love asking in the room. No, one of the biggest challenges is how do we meet the students' needs in these programs, but also maintain a budget, right? And it is challenging. It's very, very difficult. It's not easy at all. It's one of the biggest challenges of finance office and a board basis is how do we make sure that we're meeting those needs? But a lot of it is reaction time. What is the authority you have in reaction time to make that student the priority of that program? And how fast can we turn?
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
So there's been a lot of discussion in the past about blended funding, because you know, children are not monolithic.
Yep.
And many of our children are very much fit many different categories, you know, based on trauma, based on disabilities, based
Absolutely.
on bilingualism, or multilingualism in some cases. And it really is not moving fast enough to do some of that work. And I think That's something that would help districts a lot, and I know that there's a lot of education that has to go around that, but I do believe it would give us more flexibility and serving our kids in a really holistic way, right?
There are two excellent people, and it's called, instead of the term blending, because that's a blend,
I know.
it's now braiding.
Grading.
We braid each strand as in one row. Okay, so we're braiding those lines. There are two great webinars out there sponsored by OSPI. One is on Lasso and one is on OSPI website that talks about braiding. And what you're hitting on, Kamsi, is the exact problem that we all face, which is how do we integrate each program to enhance the educational value of the program to the student while still bringing in funds from another program? It takes time and effort.
Yeah, it takes time and effort, but my fear is.
Did you see that, Joe? Before we move on, Kamsi, did you see time and effort, Joe?
Yes.
That's a piece of paper that has to be filled out with multiple lines. Okay, now.
But, I would just say because when we do our analysis of our students and how they're being served, right? Based on the funding and the funding models, there are some situations that students are being underserved and
Absolutely.
overserved. And that's where I think that helps us get more directed in terms of really providing the services they need.
Yeah, one of the suggestions that they had was create a graded team at your buildings. And so.
One more team.
And one more time. And one of the things that I loved about it was finally, it was all the special services folks and the program folks sitting at one table saying, how are we gonna service the need of one student? And that was one of the best things. The problem with that, it costs money. But what they said was, they said 5 hours a week in each program that they were going to stay in these meetings that they wanted to have. And I don't know how it worked because I've left, but we can definitely find some resources because I'd love to hear more on that also.
Because I've been talking about this a lot with various folks, and I think when it's done well and you have a strong MTSS system, you have all of your students get their needs met within particular services within the school.
And yeah, is the key.
I know that, I know it's
Yeah,
critical, I know it's critical, you
Yeah.
have to have both,
You do.
and you have to have both, but then the ultimate goal is to make sure our students are appropriately served, right?
Yeah.
That is the ultimate goal. Anyway, I have one more question.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, Betty.
Just on that, Chuck,
Yeah.
I've been keep hearing that there are opportunities for doing this kind of maybe pilots or something, I don't know.
there are two federal pilots right now, both of them are filled. And they will come up again in, let's see, January so it's January now. So they'll come up in October for enrollment, and we can get you, get the team a grant application. But yes, there are graded, the feds, they're calling it, Graded Excellence is the name of the grant, and basically it is money to hire an administrator to oversee and help the grading of all of those.
Yeah, so that sounds like it'd be really good.
Yeah,
for
that's
us.
great. Well, I think we have we do have the intellectual and the research and the experiential willpower
Absolutely.
to do that, to move forward.
I think your team is well
I
versed,
think
right?
we're ready to do the, and we've got MTSS. Really quick question, just for that, I was looking back at I don't know about you all, but I was looking at slide number, you get there, slide number, the phase-in, so slide number 9.
Yeah.
Is that based on the prototypical model of 600 students at the high school, or that you have seen before, or is that based on the example of?
No,
100 students?
600.
Okay, 600, okay, thank you, that should help me, yeah.
Yeah, 600, 432, and 400.
Perfect, that's what I needed to know.
And you know, I should have put that in, but I remember that same question last time.
Yeah, no, it just helps me framing.
Yeah, those numbers help. All right, and other questions on other staffing, again, categorical funding is really hard. This is where, the administrative team really has to define on what is the vision moving forward for using all of those funds. And then looking at those staffing positions. And then finance coming up with the dollar amounts and saying, I'm gonna plug these into the grants. It takes a little time, but honestly, once it's built and the model starts to work, I think you'll see the outcome. Next slide. All right, so here we are, it's January, right? You've already done your enrollment, that's all done for you, I'm sure. And then your building principals have reviewed everything, right? And then the board is just adopting as necessary, right? Okay, so we missed January, we're gonna just start in February. So we're just gonna move this down, right? Because we're gonna start looking at enrollment now, and what does our enrollment model look like? It's not that you're behind, you're not, many districts have not started, some districts have and are running models, but it's critical that you guys have a foundation today of what you're seeing, so I love this work session, you're starting right on time, so. Looking at those projections, setting your class sizes, setting your priorities for programs, and how you want programs to work. And what is the need of the community? And where would we like to spend, if there are resources available, spend those resources versus how are we going to sustain all those enrollment gaps that we have? Of course, in February, this is kind of finalized enrollment, you're looking at your staffing. Most likely, this is the time you go to your February board meeting with a couple of plans for staffing levels and talking about class sizes. This is key to start the class size conversation. When you get in front of it with your community and you start having as directors, you're having those conversations about this is what we're doing because we really need to do that. And this is what administration thinks is going to be the outcome. That will bring in the community to say, we buy into that class size plan. And I've seen a lot of class sizes. I'm a product of a very small K6 rural school that has 62 kids. And we had 2 teachers. And I had the same teacher 4 times. And I like her. This is Quentin, this is a real good person. I'm tired of that same teacher, but it can happen. And there were 36 kids in that class. And we were all doing different things at different times. And 2 of them were my sisters. I love that. That was fun. But anyway, I think we have to be a little more open to changing what an educational environment looks like right now, because we don't have the financial backing to continue with what we have built. And that's the reality for the state. It's not just you. You're seeing it one of the first ones because of all the specialty programs and your demographics. That continues. March, of course, you're determining staffing. We're going to make final determinations, making sure that you're preparing your WIP letters if you do have to do a reduced educational force. Keep in mind that open communication is key. And I think you have a great relationship from my conversations with you guys with your unions. So keeping those lines open as you step through any one of your analysis and proposal is key also. And then of course, August, May, June, July, August, and then on the school year, you're gonna actually do this. We do a lot of that for you when we're pulling all of your enrollments. So next slide. So the building budgets are tough, and we'll spend 5 minutes on them. They're total models, and that is built on, hey, we needed this, so we've always gotten X, right? Or there is a per pupil model. The per pupil model says, say in elementary school, each pupil generates X number of dollars. That's what the building budget, and then the principals can look and allocate it within that. There's a lot of different methodologies behind that. I'm not going to say one is better than the other. But one of the things that I have learned of the per pupil model at a building level is that giving principals the ability to make decisions of how many copies their building is going to use enables a buy-in from the staff to meet those needs. So if we can each make 10,000 copies a month, okay, I'm gonna stay under that and I'm gonna work really hard at that. Versus a buy-in of the copiers unlimited, that's 2 different things for a building budget. So what we found was a simple buy-in. We also found that through research it states, if a teacher has a budget, they feel like they want to use it. If there's a requisition process that they feel comfortable requisitioning what they need, we actually save money. And so I think using those as a whole, you have to really talk about what is the philosophy. And this is not necessarily a board level conversation, but you guys hear about it. Because the first time we shut down the copier because we're 20,000 copies over and we can't afford the overage, the first person they went to is their board director to say they won't give me any copies, how can I educate students?
We went through that.
Yeah, believe me, I've been through it a lot. And I plugged it back in the next day because I said it's not working. Because I didn't know how else to say. I gave them every opportunity, but the challenge is how financially do we sustain to continue paying a paycheck when we don't have money in the bank? So that's a tough one. I ended up, thank goodness, we had great parent groups that came in and stepped in and paid for the copier, but that's not normal. I mean, so I think that's technology, of course, technology levies provide a lot of change in the MSOP budget. So in your materials and supplies and other consumables, we're looking now a lot more at digital media, digital content. You know, a lot of our textbooks are online, we're not having to make those copies. So what we've seen in the last 3 years at the national level is a 12% decline in building budgets. They didn't need as much money to do that. I don't know if that's necessarily the case, because depending on how much you have actually invested into your curriculum, it might be a no change at all. But those are things to talk about and consider. I also like to do a quarterly or biannual allocation, so a couple of times a year, say, we'll reevaluate the number of students at PE and reallocate based upon that into your building budget, because it makes everyone appreciate the money they're getting. And we kind of would say, hey, I want to really kind of hold on to that. So just keep that in mind. That's an easy thing to do in our systems reevaluate budget.
So the one revenue source you didn't really talk about was tech levy,
Anyways, yep.
which is where we've kind of stuck a lot of when we need some extra costs, we, put it there.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that was totally appropriate at all times, but anyway, there's an interesting dynamic going on around there.
OCI has showed me the jail, but I don't think they've used it.
Right.
So we're fine right now. No, I'm with you. I mean, I had to do that. I had to do that a lot with teacher training days. We put through a tech levy. We also had to change our focus on one-to-ones. And we moved to, instead of everybody getting a brand new one, we reutilized some because we were using a lot of funds in our tech levies. I think it's a wonderful way of informing our community of the advancement we're making. However, our community is going to get tired of hearing that we're constantly asking for more, right? As we cut our basic education model. So I don't have words of wisdom on this other than be true to your community. If you went out for a tech levy and you promised them security vestibules because it was a security and technology thing, make sure we're following through with those, but then make sure that you're using those dollars as needed to support the system as designed, right? Or what the board feels is most important for that system. So I don't think you've done anything wrong. I think it's the way we sustain right now because they took away the ability for us to levy.
Right, because that's another one where the state, you look at the MSOC, say, forgot whatever it is, $150 for student. It actually costs, like $400.
Yep, absolutely. Yep. 1431, I believe, is the total for all of those things on the right there. Technology, utilities, insurance, curriculum, professional development, security, facilities, that's hilarious. When it costs us almost 3 times or 4 times that, I think it's the national. All right, next slide. Okay, really quick, I'm gonna go through mechanics that you don't care about, because I'm way over probably on my time, and I wanna make sure that you guys have just enough. So each one of our different revenues have a category, and those in the administration offices, they know how this is, but we categorize all the revenue, and we can print, of course, reports. You see our budget status reports, these revenue structures, just to understand where your revenue came from. That's all this slide is for. That, you'll go to the next one. Revenue is easy, expenditures are difficult. Did I tell you? We're from the state of Washington and we like to make everything complex. First, every single account code has to have a program. 00 is regular instruction, 10 is federal, 20, so forth and so on. You see those? So that's the PP in that object code. That's called P program. Sometimes we have a PPSS. SS stands for sub-program. Those are defined at the local level, so those are only districts. We do not report that to OSPI, but every time we send a report to the state, it must have a PP, which is the program, 2-digit. Then it must have an activity code. These are the most common activity codes, or the structure of activity codes. There's about, I don't know, 89 somewhere in there. They add them all the time, they subtract them, they tell us when we can use them, when we can't use them. It's a bunch of smoke and mirrors, but we can pull reports on that. Then it must have a 4-digit object code, because we just changed the structure. We used to just have 1-digit object codes. Was it a debit transfer, or credit transfer? Was it a cert salary? Was it a classified salary? So forth and so on. That's the first number of the object code. Now we have to have a full 4-digit. So we know everything that happens down to that 4-digit, and that goes up to the feds. Yeah, that was fun. And then 2 years ago, they decided, oh, guess what? Okay, we're gonna change all your building numbers. And now you must use the OSPI standard building number, not what we've identified in the district. So each expenditure code has to have this data that is shipped up to OSBI for reporting and then summarized. Now, as a board, you don't care. But what you do know is that those thousands and millions of lines that have to be budgeted on all roll into this factory. And then we have to roll that up to the ESD, and then I roll that up to OSBI. Continue on, please. Next slide. All right. Supplies, services, travel, and capital, these are the things that you can freeze, right? Anybody good at freezing? Right?
For sure.
Travel, everybody said, you know, we got into this, oh, everybody's financially, we need to be cautious, let's freeze travel. Did we know that travel is less than 1% of our budget? So freezing travel does not do a dang thing, but they say, let's freeze travel. Okay, good idea. That saved us a whole 200,000. Now let's talk where we're going to freeze. We have to freeze hiring. Remember, it's the people. It's people that cost. These things are required. I have to buy paper for the copier. I have to pay the copier lease. I have to pay our insurance. If Constance needs to come here for a superintendent's meeting, I need to pay her for travel. It's not an option to say we can just slash these, right? You know, we typically have very little budget in nine. Nobody budgets capital projects out there. We're using our capital projects budget, right? We're using our tech levies. We're using capital projects to do those things. That's really important. So the idea here is obviously those three areas probably are not going to be areas that you cut significantly because they're required expenditures. That's the problem.
And the other big issue with them is they're being incremented from the state at this tiny little amount.
CPI, right?
And the reality is, I mean, like the insurance,
33%.
33%, they're increasing at 3%.
Yep, we're up 3.8%. I mean, let's give a point. I'm factual when I give the legislature credit for what they're giving us, but this is the problem. We think this is gonna save us billions, this saves us nothing. Next slide. Okay, just make sure your federal guidelines, I said that red tape, all of them have red tape. We talk and joke about time and effort, but I literally had an individual take on 4 different programs and had to time and effort on all of them. And it was a tally sheet. And that's all I could do, but that was grading that program so that I was getting the best for that student. And I see a lot of my paraprofessionals doing that, unfortunately. My paraeducators were the ones that had to kind of just manipulate around the students within those buildings. It does work though, and it can be done, but that's the time and effort. Suspension of debarment is obviously your plan, obviously with that, but that any person that is paid by you must have suspension of debarment for any federal funding. It's a big deal, and the auditor loves it right now for some reason. Okay, quotes and bids, of course, purchasing guidelines, they get to deal with all of that. $5,000 or more now is the community uniform guidance for all federal, which I really disagree with, but it's what they're saying now we're having to do, especially if it's small works roster. I don't like, but anyway, supplement, not supplement, that again is staying in those federal programs, making sure that you're continuing to spend the same dollar amount as you were last year and not supplanting it by using a federal program. Big problem, but we can usually, there is a 3-year historical look back for that, so we can typically correct it within those years before we get into a real problem. So if you get into that, of course, Amy knows where to call and we can help look at that. Grant management, of course, as a grant manager, all of your buildings or the district office, you're looking at what is an allowable cost. Grants are very specific now. If it's not allowed, they'll just fine you and take that money back. So keep it in mind. Next slide. Okay, this is about grading, school-wide Title I. I don't know if this, if you have school-wide Title I. You do, okay. So this is just, again, and this was the attempt to talk about grading, and we kind of covered grading, but the idea really is about using every one of our programs, and grading the funds to find the best outcome. And it's kind of hard to do, but it can be done. And what I've seen a lot of is not just the staffing being graded, but I've seen technology being graded. So we're buying in a bilingual classroom, perhaps some type of translation software so that we can use it with the existing staff. We're grading those funds to make the best intent of that. That's what this is all about, is how can Title I help or assist in a classroom that we already have maybe fully staffed, and we just need things, a tool or an appliance, that's that kind of thing. But again, this is a lot of paperwork. So just make sure you're doing all of that awesome paperwork. Okay, next slide. I can work a lot more with this, but this again, and if it comes to you guys have questions about grading, I'm more than happy to do, we have a presentation on it that I can definitely give you. But this is more about that grading, so I'm gonna just go past it and move on. Co-curricular, okay, so everybody wants to have the discussion on, can we have a football team, or should we include band, right? I think it all comes down to prioritizing as a board for what our community wants. But it's not a yes or no, and we get stuck in the yes or no. And I've been, I worked for a charter school that was failing in bankruptcy, in Idaho. It was their first charter school. They didn't want to see it fail, so they brought me in and they said, say it. And I said, they're going to have to make cuts. And we had a tremendous amount of extra co-curricular activities. They were wonderful. What we did was we created an alternate year. I couldn't do all of them every year, but we created an alternate year. So every year we were running those things. But then we got the community involved, and we were doing community gym time for some of those basketball, volleyball, other times that we were reaching out to our community. And the fact was, I wanted to provide everything that you just can't. And so having those discussions of what if hypothetically we were only to have a varsity volleyball team and we did intramural for 9th and 10th grade. How does that look? And would the city support us if we allow them to have gym time? And that answer is the community starts to wrap around the district and say, absolutely, let's start doing that. Or can we do a feeder program? Can we do something like that? All of those are conversations that you have to start having because you cannot physically afford a robust co-curricular and co-curricular department or amount of money and still maintain the actual internal school district as a whole. So it's tough. I know a lot of these things are being discussed, not only with you, but as the district, and I'm sure you're having conversation with your regional athletic coaches and talking about that in the athletic directors. Next slide. As a question about co-curricular, it usually is a sore topic. And I'm ready, I can step in if somebody accuses me or gives me a nod or a wink. I'm happy to. It's a tough decision.
The big issue is this, when we think about our students that are recovering from COVID and the social emotion, and they need to do exactly these things.
Absolutely.
And that's, so it makes it doubly and triply tough now, because that's exactly what our students need to be doing.
Absolutely.
We need to have rich programs for that.
And that's the challenge we face. We got all this money, but we forgot we needed to save some. Because now the after effect is the social emotional that we have to start cleaning up. And we hear that all the time. Cities are kicking themselves because they didn't save money so that they could do more after school programs. Associated student body, now, and your ASD funds, of course, are student-driven funds. Sometimes boards look to them to fund, I would say, co-curricular events or curricular events. This is a slippery slope, so just be very careful as you start this and make sure it's well defined. It's not a bad thing and it can be done. I just want to caution everyone as we start that discussion that typically you can get into a lot of hot water with ASB funds, and there are definite rules around these funds that you don't mess with. So when in doubt, we try not to touch them.
And they should have student voice.
Absolutely.
At every step.
100%. It has to have a student voice. That's part of the law. Absolutely. Okay, next one. Okay, ask questions. Most of you have my card. If you don't, and you have a question, I want you to reach out if you want. to schedule a call, I'm more than happy. Jolie and I are always there to have a conversation. The idea is you're not alone. You're not in this by yourselves. We're here to support you. We want to help you make those decisions. Understand the rules, understand the why not. So when we say no, there's a reason why, most likely it's a no, but I can tell you 12 other ways to do it. But I don't often tell you the solution, because I can tell you steer away from X. And then usually the solution is more organic. Just be aware and monitor. I think one of the things that Amy is coming into your district, we're gonna work really hard on educating, and there will be some new financial tools that you'll be reviewing on your monthly board meeting as part of your body conditions. I think that'll be great for all of us. We'll be learning them as you learn them, because they're new to us. But that'll give us an opportunity to get your feedback on some of those tools and how we're performing as an ESC and as a state. And ultimately, keep monitoring and getting that data back that we need to orchestrate up to our legislature to say, hey, the system's not working as intended, and let's keep advocating for our students, because that's what we're all here to do. So with that being said, I can take any questions. I know we've been at it for a long time, so.
So one of the questions,
Sure.
question that we've been talking about is, a potential revenue source is Medicaid.
Yeah.
And which is a logical one for us, since we have the high poverty rates, dollars, and a lot of it to be on Apple Health. And how do we make sure that we're plugging in as much as possible to get those funds coming to us?
Yeah, Jolene spoke to get the crystal ball out of her car, and then I can probably look into it, because Medicaid is one of the worst systems to ever do projections in that I have ever seen in my life. And then if I forget to dot an I one time, they won't pay me on that whole line item for the rest of the year. Let me tell you.
However, I mean, I've had this discussions, there's somebody in the healthcare authority who's, oversees the
Yeah.
school
Yeah,
side of this, and she has said in recent years, and I don't know how true this is, but that they've actually been working to make the process easier to work.
The process is fantastic now.
Yeah.
The process is much better.
So, I
The
mean,
electronic process.
as a district, we kind of checked out of that whole thing a number of years ago, and I think there's.
Are you talking administrative match, or are you talking Medicaid service provider?
Medicaid service provider.
So Medicaid service provider, yes, it is much better. The electronic reporting took away all the paper. So
Yeah,
we no longer have to do manual paper
Right.
stuff. That changed the scope of it.
right,
What didn't change is getting all the licensed providers in your building approved by Medicaid. That is the bigger problem, because their system is so slow. By the time you've already serviced them for 3 months, you're just now getting approval to start billing for them.
yeah, and on that issue, the person who done, the healthcare authority that I talked to, has indicated there are ways to kind of, I'm not an expert in this, work
You
on
can.
that, you can have one person
It's all-
license
yeah.
and supervise.
Supervisor, yeah, and it can be done. The administrative costs, so I always said, for every dollar I get from Medicaid, 30 cents went to administration. And if I could afford that, I think it's a good deal. The problem is identifying from year to year, those services that are billable and the long-term serviceability, or the total amount that can be collected for that service. Now, if you have some high-end needs that don't have a max because of the need they have, absolutely, it's wonderful, right? Because you can continually serve them as needed. Unfortunately, some of the smaller ones, vision, for instance, is not one that you want to service. Because just getting a licensed vision care is absolutely expensive, and then going through the process. But again, I agree with you. I think there are a lot of great opportunities. We hired a company to do it. So I have a third-party administrator company. They also use what nurse licenses, so the nurse license oversees everyone that is doing the first 2 months of billing. I still probably made out of, I would say 500,000, I probably made $60,000 worth of revenue after everything was paid. Not bad. I mean, that's still very good, but it's not necessarily a profit center, but I do think it can be profitable. So that's my take on it. I don't know if you have more to add on
I
that.
don't have anything more to add on the Medicaid in particular. I would say as the board is exploring new revenue sources that we look at making sure that we look at the whole picture, everything costs.
Yeah.
So there's always, what does it take to actually bring that in to make sure that's the key part.
Mhm. Good questions? I'm gonna be here, I'm gonna be with you guys, so I'm always here and we'd love to have one conversation. And you have my number and of course my phone and email, so we're always happy to help. So sorry it's been long, but now you are officially, you understand budget 101. I can give everybody their certificates later. Thank you.
If there's a test, let us know.
Okay. I'll work on it right now.
I am ready for that.
Dog ate my whole.
We'll give you some easy questions.
Great, thank you so much. There are definitely questions that came up from the hearing, but really, of course, thinking about like, there are more questions, I think, for the Tukwila team. So with that. Good start.
Excellent. So, Amy Fleming, Financial Officer, Greg and I are going to tag team a bit, but as he's starting to step back a little bit, I'm stepping forward, and so I'll kind of lead the presentation, but of course, with his knowledge, background, and experience with the district, he'll be interjecting, I'm sure quite often, so. So next slide, please. So basically, the goal of this is, just a fabulous job on the budget 101 training. We really appreciate it. And so then what we're going to do is add on to that with the Tukwila, some of the Tukwila specifics. So this slide just represents the demographic of Tukwila School District. You can see that it's kind of hard to see on the screen here, but the location of all of our schools, and also to note kind of some of the previous bond projects and what we provided for those schools. So for example, Foster High School added 19 classrooms, auxiliary gym, and that was finished in 2020. This also shows not very well on the screen, but as you'll see on a couple of slides coming up in the future here, is that we had some impacts to our enrollment based on two charters. Is it two charters, one charter and one private?
One charter school made impact, and then Abu Bakr relocated from Seattle.
Okay, so that this just gives you some demographics. So if we can go to the next slide and we'll start.
I guess just a, when we, last time we discussed this, the question is how many of our students actually ended up going to the schools? These are regional schools, and so there was actually very few. Some went and then actually came back to us.
Right.
So the question is, you know, my last remembers these schools really haven't had much impact on our enrollment. I don't know if that's still true. Yeah, I don't know that anybody's checked recently, because like the Empire Card School has grown. You know, they started at I think at the K1 level, and now they're full K6. And so whether, you know, the question is how many of our students that would have come to our school actually are going there? I don't know.
Yeah, and we don't have those demographics. We know it's regional, so it's going to be students from all over the region that decide to go to Impact as an example. But we did see some impacts from Tukwila, and so so if you can move to the next slide. This slide shows the number of students at TVE over time. And as you can see on the line graphs here for each of the schools, you can see where the enrollment was at its highest point. So Foster, for example, had the most students, FTE students, back in 11-12. And since that time, it was running a little bit steady, and then obviously the pandemic hit, and that's when we started to see some of these sharp declines. This is not unusual for Tukwila. This happened across the Puget Sound region, and we're not entirely sure, excuse me, what happens, other than we know that some did alternative learning, some decided to homeschool, and we do know that there were families that entirely moved out of the state of Washington. Okay, and then this most current year, you see a bump back up in the enrollment numbers. And it was a little bit unexpected, but it, as we all know, it has to do a lot with the asylum seekers in the area.
And I think we also know that Foster has something to do with the fact that Tyee High School
Yeah,
is getting remodeled and people want to come.
yeah.
Yeah, that was what I Foster all the time,
Yeah.
that that remodel project can be done in 2 years. So this little bump, we have to be prepared when we think about future projections in 2 years, that we are gonna be losing those students.
And the other thing that was really hard to determine at this point is, the future enrollments. We have a lot, we have a high transient population in the Loyola School District, so what does that look like? Is will enrollment start to come back down, will it be flat? And the transient population makes it a little bit more difficult to track and try to determine. And so we have to take those factors. The other thing is that birth rates are down in the Puget Sound region. It's coming down, and the anticipation is that they will continue to decline over the next decade. You're seeing it again along the whole Puget Sound corridor. And so that also has to be taken into consideration, because that will impact the flow as well.
I think the refugee asylum seekers is going to depend a lot on what's going on in our southern border, which
Yeah.
is totally out of our control.
Right.
And we really have no idea what's gonna happen down there.
Yeah. Next slide, please. So this is just a different view of total K-12 enrollments. Again, I've already alluded to a lot of this information. Really saw the enrollment decline as a result of during the pandemic. And it has increased here this fiscal year. Excuse me. Next slide, please. So this is just an overview of what they call fund balance accounting. This is a typical conversation and requirement based on governmental accounting standards that we have to follow. The district utilizes 5 funds. I was remembering coming from another district, we didn't use transportation vehicles, so now I have to remember we have 5 funds. Our main operating fund is the general fund. That is where we do all of our operations in our business. Our capital projects is where we handle our bonds, our capital tech levy, and things of that nature. Debt service is where we actually pay our debt. So that's where we pay our bond, make our bond payments and pay any outstanding debt. Justin talked about associated student body funds. Those are accounted for separately in their own fund. And then we also have a transportation vehicle fund that's used to purchase buses. The next slide is just a pie chart to show our revenue that Justin talked about in great deal. This shows the percentage of the types of money that we receive in the district. So 14% of our funding comes from local levy. This is our renewal levy that's coming up on the February 13th ballot. So just to give you a flavor of the percentage that we ask our voters to provide to us. And so we're projected to receive 8.5 million in local levy this tax year. Justin already talked about the next slide quite a bit. The state revenue, we do see our apportionment. It has all of those factors that he talked about in great detail, so I wasn't going to spend a lot of time on the slide unless you have questions. It's just the specific type of funding that we get from the state.
And then the next slide. This reiterates the information that Justin was talking about. And again, Justin spent a lot of time on this. Another example of a boring but important slide. These formulas are at the heart of our funding.
By the way, it's listed a couple of times.
Never said any of this was boring. Never said this was boring. But I did find it very interesting.
This determines how much money we get from the state. Okay.
So the important thing is that this is the flip of Justin had in terms of ratios. This flips the ratios and said, so for psychologists, 23,000. So if we get 1 psychologist for every 23,529 students in elementary school, for example, and it's just a way, a lot of people, it's easier to digest sometimes and easier to show how ridiculous it is in this format.
my slides now. It's so ridiculous.
Yeah,
If you could record that, maybe I'll just play that portion for everybody.
Tyler, but this guy has all the.
Yeah, exactly.
But if you think about that, you look at the middle school, right, 216,000 for a school psychologist, right? It just,
That's zero.
yeah, it's zero, right? And if you think about it, because we don't even have a district that big in this state, so anyway.
Yeah, we have to share like 3 for the entire state of Washington.
Yeah.
Okay. So, another thing I want to point out on this. You get into to decimals, Justin showed you a slide, it's decimals going on 4 points and it's still around, still like less than 1. But a percentage movement in that is huge. And especially in the spring, when Dave gives a legislative update. And he said, these are the things that the legislation is talking about. We might talk about spend, might talk about something else. The numbers are huge for us. Little numbers, but they're huge for us. When you hear Amy talk about it, when you hear Dave talk about it, again, primarily in the spring, during the legislative session and when we build our budgets. Yeah. Okay, small numbers, but they're huge for us, especially in the predicament that we're in. Next slide. So speaking of what Justin presented, also presented the data that is shown up here. It's an example of how the state is not funding us appropriately. Justin told you that statewide insurance rates are up 33%. Our calculation, it kind of it might round a little bit. We're up 34% year over year in our insurance. Okay. Some of that, sure, we had some claims, but this is a statewide, it's a nationwide issue. So we're up 34%, our funding didn't go up 34%. What 34% means for us is up $200,000 year over year. When we're talking about people, that's our most experienced teacher with a few extra days and their benefits that we could afford, but now we can't afford it.
And some of what's driving those insurance costs is the, a number of cybersecurity incidents that are hitting, not necessarily school districts, but nationwide. It's a huge impact. It has impacted some of the school districts, in the region, and even statewide. And then the other big impact that is completely outside of our control is the number of, incidents of, really bad behavior, with teacher-student incidents. And so those 2 factors are what has really driven the insurance rates to go so high. And unfortunately, all of those factors are outside of the control. You can do things as a district to mitigate those. But it's becoming a problem. And I don't think it's just the state of Washington. I think it's nationwide.
Unfortunately, some of those lawsuits, and we had this happen like 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And there's one bill that's, you know, school districts have been fighting really hard again, things called prejudgment interest.
Yes.
The attorneys want to be able to take these judgments that happened 30 years ago and apply compound interest rates over 30 years. And that was talk about raising insurance rates.
Yeah, and that'll just, that cost alone will.
Yeah. But the attorneys are really insistent. It's coming back again this year. They're trying to modify it to placate us a little bit, but it's still going on, and that will just destroy the insurance.
I would agree with you. So again, a lot of the information that we're presenting, Justin has covered. So on the next slide, we talk a little bit about federal revenue. We received quite a few grants. Again, all of the grants that we receive have, you know, significant red tape attached to it. So it's not, I call it green money and red money. Green money means you can spend it, you know, however you want, within the guides of, you know, the state of Washington rules. Red money means there's a lot of restrictions and they dictate pretty significantly how you can spend your money. So the listing of the federal revenue here, all have pretty significant strings attached as far as how we can spend the money, what we can spend it on, what that looks like. The other thing that we have obviously received over the last few years is the ESSER funding. This is what is creating what we call a cliff in the state of Washington for school districts. Tukwila is not alone in this manner. And so what happened is a number of school districts around the state were able to utilize these funds to help with COVID related activities, also to maintain their staffing at current staffing levels. Well, what's happening is now the ESSER funding is going away. That money is being spent and it's creating a huge cliff for school districts. Tukwila is not alone in this. It's going across the state of Washington. And so that is part of the challenge that we're facing as well, that we have to mitigate, because as the funding goes away, either the positions go away or we have to prioritize what positions we keep and then what else is going to be used.
Next slide.
So in speaking of ESSER, overall, we've received about $18 million in ESSER funds. This year, we have about $6 million left to spend. We have 18 funded positions. Some SPED costs that we put onto ESSER, SPED, special education, sorry, I'm using acronyms, I'm trying not to. So please always interrupt me if I use an acronym that you don't understand.
I don't. I transfer 8th grade student. I'm just nodding. I'm over here Googling and I'm like, you know that, but I don't. I do now. I just want you to know I don't want to interrupt you the whole time. So
You're
you
fine,
can help.
and we can always get together and have a conversation, so.
I can say what some other people think. For friends, right?
And so as I alluded, again, the funding goes away, August, well, we have until September 30th, and then a period of time where we can finalize our claims, but the funding is going away, which is causing that for us, so. That's kind of compounding, of the situation.
And the start thing for me, when you look at these positions, these are all support positions, student support positions. So the way I explained to the legislators, we're gonna pull the rug out from under our students who have the most need for these support, and this is just not gonna be good.
And I think the challenge, and I know we're talking budget, but this is probably the worst possible time, right? We're coming out of COVID pandemic shutdown, reassessing, and we don't know the impact of it at these formidable stages, particularly the elementary, middle school, and what it did to psychological issues that high schools already have. So I just, and it's funded at a fraction of a percent and possibly going down, like the math doesn't matter.
So yesterday we had four of our students and we asked them to talk about, what it meant to them. And one of the students was talking about the mental health support she got. Another student was talking about the AVID program, the academic support they got. And so they got an earful of what it meant to our students. So hopefully that made a little dent.
And I just want to know, if you notice that above that, it says what the contracts are, and some of those contracts are go hand in hand with most positions. For example, Belong Partners, which is one of the contracts that has been a lever to support with SEL, the social emotional teachers in schools. So it's a double win, but that's what I'm trying to speak in some of these cases. And so, yeah, and there's some of these positions that, decisions were made. I'm trying to wonder how they were funded in this way, but if our goal is to now ensure that whatever our priorities are, that if we decide, this is the task for us, if we decide that something within this is a priority, then we have to decide, because we have a deficit on the other side, then we have to decide what does that replace. So that's the work.
And there was a lot of discussion when ESSER money started. Okay, don't fund, continuing or staff positions that we want to continue. And you can say that, but, you know, the question was, ultimately it came down to, you know, would 2 or 3 years of this be better than nothing?
Right.
Yes, it would be better than nothing.
Yeah.
And so we actually went and funded, you know, some positions that kind of, you know, conventional thinking says don't fund your ongoing, but, you know, this is what we were faced with, and we'd rather support our students for at least a few years rather than nothing. So that's where we went.
Next slide. So this slide shows Tacoma School District specific expenditures. I know Justin in his presentation talked about 85% of expenditures are payroll related, so salaries and benefits. We're a little bit different. It's an anomaly for me personally as I walk into Tukwila because I've never seen the percentage this low in a school district. Every single school district I've worked for or been involved with has been at least 85 to 87% for adjustment as needed to. I suspect that some of it is sitting in our contracts area, and that has to do with hard to fill positions, high need students. Some of the things that we have to do where we actually have to contract out some of those services. And so that's where I think you see the anomaly if you were to compare us to a different school district. I think our contracts are a little bit higher than you would see in other school districts. So any questions on that?
I guess I am curious about like which of those contracts are because they're hard to fill positions or special positions versus where we just contracted out because it may have been easier at the time or I don't know. I think I'm looking at you because I know a lot of contracts.
Yeah, so the hard to fill positions, we do have some teachers on contract, agency contracts, we do have some paras on agency contracts. The teachers that we have on agency contracts are people who are hired after the school year started. So part of it is us getting ahead of our staffing so that we aren't gonna have to rely on agencies for that. And then, you know, after the school year starts, and at least now, hiring is easier through an agency in the fact sense that they're doing recruiting like every single day. Now, it doesn't mean that that's the right thing. Our positions are still open. We're still advertising. We're just not getting applicants in the same way that we're getting referrals from some of the agencies. And then some of the other contracts that we have that aren't staffing are for students with high needs that we're not able to meet. And so we contract with another non-public agency to provide their educational services there. Those things won't go away.
And then do you know like a general cost comparison of how much a contracted teacher, as an example you just gave, versus a staff?
To be honest, they're fairly consistent.
I think the other thing that was going on, I know there, especially at the beginning of COVID, you know, we were trying to hire some of the like quarantine specialists and extra nurses. We wanted to get them from contractors because then they could, you know, be easily reduced rather than having to lay off a staff person. So there's some of that. I don't know how much of that's going on anymore, but I know that was the thing for a while.
Next slide. So this is a really good graph. I really do like this graph. It shows over time your revenues and your expenditures. And so as you can see, you know, expenditures starting at about 21, 22 is when they really started exceeding those revenues. And so 2 years ago it was 2.2 million more. Last year it was 3 million more. So we spent more, 3 million more in the money than we actually had. And so that's what created the ending fund balance as of August 31st, 2020.
So the question I'm gonna ask several, and this maybe I'll bring it up here to start because it's gonna be several things. I'm, as a board member, I wanna know kind of, I didn't feel like, you know, we were totally informed of how bad the situation was getting soon enough. And so we can talk about the different reports and so forth. And also I understand, you know, I'm sorry, as I'm understanding the accounting system and I know I've complained about this before, is like you close books at the end of the year, so we don't. I mean, we got things that came after the closing of books at the end of the year about how bad things were. I mean, that doesn't help us as a board to kind of recognize these things before it gets bad and start whittling away at it. So that's just a general question, I guess. I mean, I'm, you know.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things I'm gonna work closely with Justin on is, having some of those easy reports, to provide to the board. You'll also find me the type of person where I'm going to speak up, and if I see a red flag, I will be taking it to the superintendent, and I will also be bringing it to your attention to say, I think we're starting to see a problem here, and we really need to start addressing this. I'm not one to hold back on that, because I don't ever want to see the district in this situation. It's never a good feeling. So that's my approach. That's who I am as a person. I fight really hard to make sure that we are spending money and budgeting appropriately. And when we start seeing some of these dives coming in, there's indicators that are coming.
Yeah. I think there are. And
Yeah.
I'm now looking back, I can recommend any time.
Yeah, it's easy to see when you look back.
Yeah, and that's
Sometimes
the
what
problem
happens,
is
right.
that the only person that can see it before is the CFO, because you're looking, you know, you have those, and, you know, during this time we were getting, you know, the auditor was, oh, everything's great, clean audits, you know, so we're getting all this information that was not really telling us the whole story, I think. So anyway,
We also
Yeah.
recognize as a state that the budget status report that is required. for the school board does not show the detail
right,
of management level. And that's why the state OSBI specifically is going through a process right now to identify, we need to do better at moving towards.
right,
And so what you're saying is exactly what we're doing when we're making those reports. Because
okay, yeah,
we saw it as at an ESC level, and so we were communicating with the CFO and saying, we're concerned, there's some red flags. However, not being able to articulate it and critique the report that's a really hard thing for a board, because you're just waiting for somebody to tell you.
right,
So we're recognizing that now, and simple graphs like this that show monthly, hey, we spend this much, but we got this much revenue, and this is where you're projected now based upon revenue and over expense. That's a simple 4 number thing
Yeah.
by month that we can keep track for you as a board, and you have that as a snapshot.
yeah, and then we need that forward-looking guesstimate, that's, it may not be exact, but at least guesstimate. And I didn't have this conversation with the school board directors, because we don't get training about, and hopefully when you get these things set up, then they could be incorporated into WASDA training, so that.
They are on easy to do the
Yeah,
dashboard
yeah,
for
yeah,
boards,
perfect.
so I think we're good
Okay.
at that. It's on its way.
Okay,
Next slide. So this just is a graph that shows the ending fund balance, over time. And so again, as a result of expenditures being greater than revenue, it's kind of like your own personal, if you are spending more money than the paycheck that you get, your savings account is going to go down pretty quickly. And so that's what you see, in this, situation. End of the year, negative fund fiscal year, which automatically triggers those binding conditions that we're in the process of working through at the moment.
I guess the other thing on this one. So, you know, I've been on the board for a long time, I see budgets come at us every year. And there's projections for what the ending fund balance is gonna be. And for years, they would, you know, budgets kind of by nature are conservative, which is fine, except these budgets would come in with really low fund balances below our 6%, which is our policy. And it would bother me, but then at the end of the year, you see years 18, 19, 20, 21, by the end of the year, they were way up there. So I kind of stopped worrying about that. I mean, theoretically, if a budget comes to me and says, we're projecting the ending year fund balance to be about 6%, I should be, you know, pounding away at, you know, that's not acceptable. But after a number of years, okay, well, you know, and so there's something else going on, and this happened actually just this last year, this 22-23, all of a sudden, I noticed the budget would say we were gonna end up with a 1% fund balance, and we did end up with a 1%, And so, you know, that was having me totally, so now, okay, the rules have changed here. What's going on?
So you're gonna see two different things. You're going to see your budget as your budget. That's the staff that we make.
Right,
And the
right,
session.
right,
Then you're gonna see your forecast.
right,
That's the monthly forecast that we're going to work very hard on, and part of what triggers environment conditions to show actual expenditures for projected for the year.
right.
And they're projecting your ending fund balance. The big thing with ending fund balance is not all of it is cash asset, right? Some of it is reserved or restricted for special purposes.
Right.
The new tool that OSPI we're working on and with all the ESDs shows that calculation to the board in a snapshot over 12 months and actually puts that in. And Greg and Amy have a draft of what that looks like. It's the cash flow projection. That is what we're recommending be the new board report. And that we spend time really articulating the data as we move forward on it. So you have not only that stat, which is your budget status report required by law, but you're seeing actual data fill and project for through the month and where it's going to be. And then you can ask questions like, I see we only have 100,000 in our accounts payable. How is that possible for a month when we spent 5 million every other month? Those are the questions that the board should be answering, but we weren't able to project those on the formats that we are in. But that is coming, and we hear that. I mean, I think the state sees the disservice we've done to boards by not giving them a tool and educating a board on how to watch fiscal.
Right,
Because we haven't had a problem, as long as we were in
yeah,
an incline for enrollment, and our enrollment was going through the roof,
right,
it wasn't a problem.
right,
You can manage your budget with Budget Bus.
right.
Now, you need Budget Bus just to hold everything together, so a little different scenario, and it's. And that's if you can afford it, so I just water.
Faster than paper.
Yes.
Have water and.
Yeah. A little something.
A little.
So next slide.
A quick question, do we have a projection for the 23-24? Since we're talking about projections and different things that we should be doing, what is it at this point?
So-
If we're running at a 20, what is it, negative 1.5, 22 to 23, what are we at? What is our projection for 23-24?
So a projection, it will be presented either at the end of February or early March. I'm not sure. What we're looking at right now, these preliminary numbers right now, when I say preliminary, tons of hours have gone into them. So 2 years ago, we overspent by 2.2 million. Last year, we overspent by 3 million. And most of you might recall at the last board meeting, I said, by the time you start school, most of your cost structure is already done. And we do our reductions in force in the spring. We do most of our planning in the spring, we send most of our contracts during the summer. This year was pretty much baked in that it was going to be around 3.5 million. What we're thinking it's going to be now is going to be somewhere in between these two numbers.
Because of enrollment increases or what?
We got the enrollment increase, which is helping us by about $500,000. And it's all of the controls that Dr. Pedrosa has put in place. And has been very firm on. One thing about nobody can spend any money on food unless it's required by a grant. To Justin's point. All right, you save a few $1,000. But it sends another message. If I have to go to a conference, an out-of-state conference that has been approved by the board, and the board has said that you're on your own for meals, everybody knows I gotta watch when I use the copier, and I'm not gonna use color copy. It starts to turn the mindset. That said, and we'll talk about it some more, but
Can I just add, that so when I go to staff meetings, one of the things that I'm asked all the time, it's been at 3 different staff meetings is, So we start turning around, so what do we do to make sure that we don't revert backwards? And the first thing I said is, so we've never noticed when we set the controls and we publish them every week and we work with folks, bad habits, it takes a lot of time to change our habits, right? For good or for bad. And so one of the things I stressed is these controls are not going away. This is not gonna be a one-year deal. And the other thing we're gonna work on, and I think this is something that we've all agreed to, is making sure that what we have in place gets part of our procedures moving forward. And that they're embedded in some procedure documents that are actually in the internal drive that everybody, so let's say we have a new CFO in 10 years, 5 years, whatever that looks like. Or whatever those procedures we set, some of these controls, some of these things that we need to ensure these new habits happen, because we can't be in the situation again, right? So just like all of us who plan a budget, right, we have to pull things back a little bit. Sometimes those things that we pull back stay for forever. So those are some of the things we're working on internally as well, is not only building our controls, but actually it's making sure that they happen. And then we are trying to work on a system to make sure that they're in place for the long term. And I think the other piece is working on our own system as well, right? So what are we working on within ourselves as a district? How are we communicating? But it's gonna take a while. So we are seeing progression, but it's not fast enough as well. We are making critical decisions, for example, when we get a request for, as you heard, staffing is a big, it's most of our budget. So we continue to get staffing requests, and we are scrutinizing every one of those, impact, understanding how is this paid for before, looking at it from a different lens. I think past process would have been, it's a need, so let's do it. But we're not doing that anymore. We actually can't afford to do that anymore. So, and those are hard things. It's hard to say no to some of these things because, but we aren't in the position to say yes either in some of these cases, so.
I think that's a huge, because the staffing, so that's the huge thing you'll actually turn the vote, not now, but over time, they'll start turning the vote.
Yeah, and which is why we've asked, and I have to, that they are union partners, and asking them to give us their priorities as well, so that we can start looking at those, because the bottom line is we have to make cuts, staffing cuts in some way, whether it's through attrition, through retirement, or even possibly a reduction in force in some areas. So, and then what we have to do then once we do that, because as you all know, there'll still be some of those needs. Really, if we pull back anything, add anything to staffing, is it based on enrollment? Is it based on a need? Is it based on the student? Can we afford it? All those things we have to ask ourselves. So we're working on that. It's a new muscle we're building for the system, and it's really hard. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be a long process.
Can you help me understand a little bit here? So when we're running in a deficit of, and I'm looking back here at your chart, so did that 2.2 get cleaned up after 2021, or is that carried over to 2022, 23? And is that carried over? So are we really running in a deficit of 5.2 here plus another 2 that's coming? And is that including us having the 16 million in ESSER funds? Was that already spent? So it's 16 million in ESSER funds that we're not going to get back, or I think that's what it was. Plus we're running in a deficit of somewhere of 7.2. Is that, am I looking at this correctly, or is that cleaned up? How does that work?
All right, so, I'll try to answer your question and then
Sure.
let me know what I didn't answer. So this is an income statement. So for the year, there was a 2.2 miss. Okay. So the balance sheet said, hey, you have $100 million, we're down 2.2 million. You're still up 98 million over the course, from the history of when the school district was provided. So one-time shot, that $2.2 million reduction is taken off the balance sheet at the end of the year. just for $3 million. Just for the year. Close the year, take up the balance sheet. You can go to the next slide. This is cumulative. So through from the time that the school district was initiated in 1948 until today, our balance sheet says this is how much money we had. Down $2.2 million year over year. And then we went down $3 million. And not only did we spend everything that we had, we went negative. All of the hard work that was done since 1948 through August 31st, balance sheet, the balance sheet, is that we spent all that money.
So 1.1 million negative, of course, to start the year.
As we're starting this year and then
That would
projecting an additional,
be somewhere between 3 and 2.2.
okay, and our ESSER funds that we're paying for staff, but in there, that's going away also, correct?
Yeah, so.
We don't see, as part of projections, this year basically is water under the bridge. We couldn't make an improvement in this year because the staffing levels, as Greg said, were pretty much established. They've done what they could have done to sustain, but we as fiscal officers knew we were too far into this. We couldn't change the system. And so basically, the first year of your binding conditions is null and void. It was just a practice year, right? Because it's gonna be done before we know it, and we're gonna have a negative fund balance rolling. And yeah, we're gonna do our best the next year, because I think we can't change that. And you have put in some great things. We just said yes in the beginning way too much, because we didn't know the financial impact of it.
But this year, so I heard $6 million still left in our ESSER funds, that are those committed already?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
those are committed.
So this year, we've spent above our budget, $9 million in ESSER funds, rolling a negative. So $11 million at just a zero at there, let alone keeping with our 6%, we're supposed to be above looking here.
Correct.
But
And you just said that better than anybody that I've heard.
You summarized it very well.
Previous slide. So next year. We have to find $9 million. And, yep. That's the answer for us.
Right.
And with some exceptions, you've got the 18 positions on that slide. You've probably got a $1.5 million worth of spend, where you say, you know, in addition to what we're already spending on spend. Some of the contracts. The spend piece will continue into next year. You're probably talking about $4.5 million worth of cost in the positions and some like that.
Yeah, that's why I think the important piece about the priorities he talked about from ESSER. If everyone says these have to stay, for example, then that actually then puts a big dent on the other pieces, right? Because that's gonna have a significant impact on our current, our general fund.
And then the money that we're talking about, that, and just to be clear, but if we have to find $9 million to get to a zero, right? For the district to run at a non-deficit, not getting to our 6%. So if we project our 6%, that's our goal. Let's say that's what we're looking for. How much is our 6%? What is that percentage? When you say 6%, what does that dollar amount mean to me?
Around $60 million in revenue times 6% is roughly 3.6 million.
So an additional 3.6 to get us back to healthy state.
And we're probably looking at 2 years just to get to $1.
At least 2 years to get to $1, and that's with pretty aggressive cuts without trying to completely shred the educational environment of the district.
Okay, and then, so our bonding contract is, what is OSPI's, when we say bonding contract, what's our deadlines, what are our?
So the first of it is a
Yeah.
two-year agreement, where we work together to come up with a plan. On year three, you go into a fiscal oversight committee. That's when a member from the ESD, most likely myself or Jolie, will go in and represent with members of the board. And we will ensure that we're implementing the plan with the ultimate authority that if the plan is not implemented, it can be dissolved and or we can force basically some other discussions at the table. It's never been done in the state. We don't anticipate to get to the fiscal oversight. We do not want to get to that because it triggers a whole bunch of legislation. What we want to do is get you in year one with a plan. We want OSPI to come back and say, your plan is working. We see significant approval. They'll say, do you feel confident they're moving forward? We'll say, absolutely, as an ESD, and they're going to release you. That is my ultimate hope. I think you can do it. I think there are enough opportunities for change. And with the administrative team here, I think you have the ability to do it. I really do. I feel very strongly about this, but I have no concerns about that. My bigger problem is cash flow and how we are going to make sure that we have cash flow for this district to continue to pay the bills. That's the bigger problem, but that's a different problem for a different day. But we're gonna work on that as a team and we'll figure that one out as long as we can get a pretty good budget. The biggest challenge is what is the priority?
So your presentation at the beginning, and I'm sorry to take up this much more time. So your presentation at the beginning was to have 4 or 5 different budgets, right? Is that where we're at? Are we at 4 or 5?
Projections.
Yeah, projections or budgets at this point, or is that something that's gonna be presented to us in February? Because we were saying that we had to move forward, right? On your timeline, there was January, we were supposed to have some things in place, but those aren't in yet. So is that going to be in February? Because if we're talking about a May time that we're having to talk to individuals, people's lives here and livelihoods, that window's getting shorter and shorter, right? And so I think we do a disservice the longer we wait because we have to make quicker decisions at the end without giving it the proper attention it needs. And so I just want to make sure that we're moving forward very quickly on those and on the budgets that are on those, and that we have time to do those things is my own thinking. And so I'm just, that's
We have a timeline that we're gonna be presenting.
perfect.
So we already have a timeline. We already started the process. We've already started having conversations with our union partners. And in fact, last week, the WA, which is the state union, actually presented to us, the CFOs and myself, their presentation to, on Techwell's fiscal situation. Their numbers were pulled from OSPI and many of our members, and they were in agreement around this situation. They had their presentation last Thursday. I have not heard of that impact, but it was a pretty factual presentation on the current state to all of the members. So I believe all of the members, and we've done on that staff meetings as well, are fully aware that there is gonna be some reductions coming for the next substantial reduction for the coming year. We've been meeting with our partners, we're working on the priority pieces with our union partners, we've been working with our principals. The CFOs have been meeting with the principals to review all of those pieces have already started, we've already initiated. And then Aaron's gonna present the timeline. He's also submitted that timeline to our union partners to make sure that they are aware of the timelines. They've gone a little bit back and forth about some of it, but we're in agreement that the timeline is moving forward. So we have all of those pieces in place. And then as we continue on, we'll just share what that is with all of you. And then you can
Okay, so
feedback
we're
on
gonna
it.
see the time.
We're working through all of these, this, so they put out as their timeline, we were working through that. And the team and I are meeting pretty often to look for areas where we can actually potentially start addressing reductions and staffing changes that might need to happen.
So along those lines, and maybe this is not the time, maybe it's
Yeah.
down the line, but I'm with Director Simpson. I don't want us to be in a crunch there.
Yeah,
But has the union partners' numbers, do they add up to the 6% over 2 or 3 years, or it doesn't?
I would,
Or is that what we gotta negotiate?
No.
It doesn't, okay.
No, as much as we cut, it still won't be enough.
Yeah.
Okay. As painful as it's going to be, it's not going to be enough.
I hear that, I hear the gravity of that.
Yes.
So is that a conversation being had, Aaron? Because if and this might not be the time, but we're here. If we know that even on the pre-budget, and as it was communicated, most districts staff is 85% of their budget, ours is 55, 52, depending on which number you look at. So if that, we're not as top heavy as the norm is, so we're, you know.
One of the things that the WA did share is that they did share the number of certificated teachers in the classified staff definitely was at an upward trend versus in compared to enrollment. So they have shared that slide. Exact numbers are not in alignment, but I would say that there is agreement that their core staff members it has been overrun or not overrun, that's not the right word, but an increase enrollment decline. So they did agree with that, and that has been shared. The last thing I would say is that there is what they shared with us, that they also saw through OSPI some of the triggers, which the trigger warnings, which we're gonna go over too. And so that they've been watching this and been thinking about that they've been needing to present to the Tukwila Association to make sure that that they understand that there are some trigger warnings as well that they could be paying attention to and learning about, so that we can all be working on this together. So I still haven't heard the impact of the meeting on Thursday. Hopefully we'll find out more information, but it was with all of the memberships. From the TEA, Tukwila Education Association. Yeah. Yeah, we are, the binding conditions is, feels a little overwhelming. But what I'm hopeful for is that with a plan for 2 years, that we can get us keep moving in a positive way. However, it's gonna be challenging because we have so much need in this. I mean, we have to, it's, all of these things are true. They're all true. It's not either or, and unfortunately, budget had some conversations. Those are challenging, but all of these things are true. Yes, we have a lot of need in this district. Yes, the state funds a certain way, and as you saw, the way that we're funded doesn't meet all the needs that we have to. So, but we still have to make decisions, and we have to make serious decisions about the future, because my goal is to make sure that Tukwila School District is actually fiscally sound, foundationally sound for the future generation, right?
Yes, ma'am. And I'm piggybacking in the tailspin of Director Simpson's line of inquiry, but it's sure important that if we make, as we are forced to make these serious cuts that have people's livelihood.
Yeah.
And it not work.
Yeah.
That's foolish. So, I mean, we need to.
Yeah.
We have work to do. I just want you to know, I'm not.
No, we do.
I got
We're
skip by it.
yeah.
But I think it's key that my experience with the bargaining situation is, most of it comes down to, can we agree on the numbers
Yeah.
with the union and so the fact that they're working hard on that particular issue.
And that was my conversation.
It's
Sure,
key.
they gotta do some numbers that are-
They aren't there yet, but.
But I
that's the
we're
right.
laying off people and we're still in deficit.
Right.
What have we done?
We may not be in agreement with the numbers, but there is agreement, at least my experience from the WA presentation that we got.
Yeah.
That there is agreement that Tukwila is significantly overstaffed based on the enrollment. That is what we are in agreement on. There is a significant agreement. I saw on many, many different slides presented in very different ways. We are all agreed on that,
Thank you.
which is important.
I don't know, Jack.
No, this is for you. This work session is meant for you And then for all of us to talk this through, discuss. This is for you to, because I want everyone here to really understand the situation, the seriousness of the situation. How budget finance works in the state, and then how it applies to Tukwila. So this is the time for you to ask everything you need, and you're probably gonna wanna know more later on. And so, so please ask all the questions you have.
And I just always want to translate
Yes,
how the boring but important spreads
Yeah.
actually walk. Cause they still land.
Yeah.
In hallways, classrooms.
yes, yes,
Dinner table.
We're still talking about students.
yes.
We're still talking about educating students.
That's it. So, thank you.
Talk about our babies.
Yep.
Yes, absolutely.
I guess the other point, the other point, like you made a statement that, you know, our staffing is basically locked in. My understanding of that is the certificated contracts are locked in. Administrative and classified are not. So we can't actually start, because if you wait until, you know, June, I mean, the system is gonna take this shot of a lot of people being moved out, so the earlier we can start that process, in my mind, that's, you know, you can start to smooth, you know, it helps the organization adjust to some of
As
this.
long as it depends on what the collective bargaining agreements are, right?
Sure,
If we
yeah.
bargain to have a certain ratio.
Yeah.
Then you keep
Right.
that, and then you
Right.
try to work on those things. The
Right.
biggest challenge is, how do we ensure that our partners are being treated fair through this process?
Right.
And we're being transparent in the process, because as you just said, it's people.
Yeah.
And the emotion comes with people.
Absolutely.
And, you're in an okay spot. It just, unfortunately, the pressure you feel and the weight on your shoulders as a director, that's how all of us take this, and we want to do the right thing. There's just not an easy way to do it.
So it's just kind of coming back a little bit for me is when we think about like all the different like scenarios, and we were talking about like enrollment projections and scenarios, but also like what it looks like to really prioritize that programming that we're doing, and then again, who staffs those programs. And I know that, or I think that you've been doing some kind of evaluation of like all of the different things that Tukwila is doing, because we're doing so many different things, and some of them are, you know, serving many students, some of them are just serving a few students, and really doing an analysis of what all those things are and where some cost savings might be, even just by saying, we are going to beef up this program that's supporting the same group of students, but in a different way. So I think I'm curious, one, about where that is landing, what you're finding so far, and where some cost savings might be there. And then the other thing I'm thinking about is, you know, on one hand, it's great for the board to come up with like board priorities, budget priorities, and at the same time, if that whole list of ESSER funded things, I mean, obviously, everything on there is gonna be a priority for me.
Yeah.
Social emotional learning supports, definitely our family and community liaisons. So it's all well and good for those things to be priorities, but if it comes at a cost of our education environment, right, or being able to at least get young people the baseline education that they need to be able to succeed in whatever the next steps are. So I'm almost wondering, like, what would it look like to think really bare bones, like at a basic level, this is what it is going to cost, and then use everything else as like Lego pieces that we're saying, okay, we've got, so here's our basic costs, right? And whatever that might look like, you know, all the different things that are included. Now, here are the things that we have the ability to add or take away. Like that, for me, feels like a more easier thing to wrap my head around than starting from this big thing that we know is overstaffed, that we know is we're overspending, and then try and whittle it down. So I'm just,
Yeah, we're not looking at it, so I'll just share, and I want to be mindful too, because we still have much work to do with our union, right? So I just wanted to put that out there. So I don't want to get ahead of that, because they've just finished their interviews with their team. They're gonna be sharing with us, so I don't want to get ahead of that, right? I want to be really thoughtful and respectful of their process. Because that has to be factored into some of these as well. But we're not doing, some districts, have done 10% off of every, just cut, and that doesn't work, right? It doesn't work. So we're trying to look at, for example, even looking at new programs, what I'm not willing to do, and I've never been like this, is just pull the rug out, like, just totally slash a program. Especially if it doesn't have an impact, right, a positive impact on students, like, for example, the Abbott conversation. So what I'm interested in is, so how do we keep something like Abbott going? But then what other contracts or what are the things that we can do to mitigate for that cost, right, and maybe even a little bit more, so. We're looking at some of those things, so we're really looking at so that's one thing that Scott did in September, this last year. Is he had to look at every contract under teaching and learning. He met with everybody, to the contractor, and basically said, you're on notice, on notice. And I'm not, these are contracts like 165,000, 200,000, 135,000, a lot of money. But he had to meet with that was one of the things I said you're gonna do, and he's done that. He's called every one of them, he's reviewed their contracts, he's worked through legal to see if some of them we can reduce now, right? Having that conversation, what can we pull back now? So those are things that we're doing, right? Because we wanna make sure that what we're doing is prioritized. For example, all our after-school programming, we have so many after-school programming, so how do we take the various after-school program, and everyone know the grant is gone, we don't have the grant anymore. But we do have some funding, we do have some title funding, other grant funding. So how do we recreate a different type of program that can benefit all our kids differently, not as a single, but with one service provider? And actually going back to what we said before, we're having a conversation with the city of Tukwila. So what can you do to service our kids in schools? And they've been doing that, they've been meeting with us, we have a draft plan, and we're talking about what that looks like. And they've been very, very collaborative, very supportive, and meeting us every step of the way for our requests. So we're trying to reimagine some of these things. So when we talk about SEL teachers, the way it was done, the one in every school, maybe that can't happen, but we can look at how that can happen to ensure that schools get the support they need. Or maybe we put them in schools that need them the most, right? And then we have others. So we're trying to rethink some of these things, but not take a all-out program, looking at what's really working and then reimagining maybe on some of these, but scaling it back, some of them scaling them back significantly, or having conversations and maybe cutting out some of these things altogether. Because we do have some significant contracts, by the way, that are really at a cost. And so there's some of these things that we have to look at as well. And then the other question is, and then what can we take on? Which I will say is another question too. What can we take on? What can we do more of? Rewriting, looking at our job descriptions, those types of things, and scaling in some things together. So we're looking at all of it. And we've been doing this since September, by the way. We've been looking at all of this since September.
I guess another question in relation to that is, what are some, if any, of those things, programs, again, contracts, wherever, that we could just put on hold, right, for a year, and say, this is gonna save us X amount of money, so that in hopes that, one, we can measure, is that program actually what was helping those students, right? And then also say, okay, we're gonna put some pause to hopefully be able to reinstate, when our ending fund balance is at 0% or whatever.
You should be in finance.
I find it boring, so.
Yeah. I have districts that could take you. I mean, I'm just saying.
I'm actually just kidding.
No,
It's fascinating.
so it's been, and so we're having conversation with all the department heads, schools, everywhere. We're looking for everything. Everything's being reviewed. Nothing's
And I
being
think-
not reviewed.
I think the light bulb over the entire proverbial head, the being serious about just reimagining bike club. And then the braided impact.
Yeah.
Like Casey's point, that is seen as a quality vote. All right, so you cut that, do that, it's kind of, but reimagining, like, what if the entire school was having? It may cost more, but save somewhere else.
Yeah.
And increase the quality of education at an overall, and you can cut, but then you cut to your +7, but you won't be running a quality school. But at a certain point, do we ask ourselves, why is Athens so successful? In celebrating the success, it gives a comparative, and what about the ones that are not happy? Great question. So what if the core of what we learn in implementing Athens becomes an overarching? And then you end up saving money. But that's what I mean by reimagine, and I'm new, so I don't have any
Yeah.
vested interest in things staying as they were, but you start looking at everything.
You have to look at everything.
Yeah.
So I think it'd be good, because we're having this, maybe we can move, because the question about timeline came up, Aaron, maybe we can move to timeline and then you can go backwards, if we can, is missing from the other slides, if that's okay. So slide 21, because I know that's what people care about too. I know the union asked me this too, the union leadership is asking me about the timeline as well. And people have asked me this in staff meetings, so I know there's, yes, we care about this. So go ahead,
Good evening, Aaron Dragona, HR Director for the Cicely School District. What we have here is the reduction in force key dates, and we've got, on the left side, we've got the target dates for these events to take place, but note that it's possible that the events will take place before that. And I'll explain why in just a moment. Some background information is that this has been shared very recently with the TEA union, which is the teachers and the classified instructional support staff and clerical team. And then tomorrow we have a labor management meeting with the SEIU, and it will be shared with them at that time. What we have here on January 29th, or excuse me, January 31st is our first event, which is notifying all of the staff that we're requesting your notice of early retirement or resignation. And this is an example where we did issue this notice early. We issued it on January 18th. It needs to be out or delivered before February 1st. We met that deadline. And we have agreed to wait until March 1st with just to receive all of those notices. And so that's out there. We'll send pings to everybody and remind them that the district is interested in hearing who is requesting or who's issuing a notice of resignation or retirement. At this time, we have 3 received as of today from across the district. By February 15th, we will publish what's called the seniority reports. And those go to all the union leadership teams and then the district, and then all of the staff receive them. And that information is important because the union will, and the district will use that as a source for reductions in force. And that document will be accessed so that we know where people are placed for seniority. By March 4th, it is the HR's intent to notify all of the union leads that the district intends or plans to reduce either classified, certified, or both. And what that does is it triggers a couple of things that we have agreed to do in our contract. What we've agreed to do is sit with the union leads and present the why for this need to reduce these positions. And the union has the opportunity to put together their information and schedule a time with the school board. And that needs to take place at some point within a month. You're probably within March, and that would happen. And that's if they choose to do that. And so we'll have conversations with the union leads about that if their specific agreement has that language. But I know for sure that the TA classified agreement does have that information, does have that option. And then on April 16th, that is a Tuesday, it's our goal to then have the board, the district administration would request that the board pass resolutions, which would grant the superintendent the right to sign those reduction in force letters and also the non-renewal notices. I'll pause right there because non-renewal notices are really important. So by May 15th, the district is required to notify members of the certificated unit if we're gonna exercise a non-renewal of their provisional certificate. And staff that are on a provisional 1, 2, or 3 can be non-renewed based on position. Seniority doesn't apply. And we have 64 certificated educators that are provisional 1, 2, or 3 from all across the district in all different types of positions. And so that's important. And so you can see that we actually are planning to be ahead of that May 15th deadline by delivering any of those non-renewal notices, RIF notices, or reduction enforced notices to certificated, classified, and administrative staff by May 1st.
So by provisional 1, 2, 3, you mean somebody who's been here for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Because an educator, I mean, yeah, in most cases, yes.
Okay.
But we can have experienced educators coming from another district that always start on provisional 3. Okay, well, so their first year, they may be 15 years
Yeah.
experience and they come to Tukwila, they're on provisional 3.
Okay.
We do have several in that situation. Of the 64.
So that gives the district, at least 1 year provisional for anybody who comes into the district.
Yeah, that's by statute.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, and everybody that is non-renewed, so all staff members with their positions non-renewed or RIP, they do have appeal rights. So they can file an appeal with the superintendent, and we wanted to build that process into our timeline, because that is their right. And so we would start scheduling those on May 6th. And we would then deliver all of those written decisions to them by May 31st. That's what we have.
I think the other important thing to understand is you said, very the exact word you said, position based, so there are certain positions. I mean, it's not just strictly a seniority, top to bottom, it depends, certain positions we need to keep
Yes.
regardless of, yeah.
Yes.
I have any questions about positions identified or something? Yeah, where are some of those positions?
As far as our position.
Like seniority may not matter, like what protects a position?
Okay, so skill. So for example, if if a dual language educator speaks, if that skill is required for that position, then we would skip them in seniority. If a position around there was reduced and that person that is bumping somebody with lower seniority, they wouldn't bump that dual language teacher who may have less seniority, they would skip them.
That also applies to the creative learning labs instructor.
It can. Yeah, but we would have to look at our job description and see what skill is required.
Okay.
What experience is required. So that's why I say it can.
Okay.
And that's where we would definitely be having conversations with union partners. Some of these. But it's important to note that's only for a RIF. Remember, a RIF is different, a reduction in force is different from non-renewals of provisional staff. We can pick specific positions for non-renewal of that 64. We can pick specific positions and issue a non-renewal notice. The only action they can take is appealing that decision to be non-renewed. We aren't going through seniority in that process.
Is there a timeline of when our partners, TE and all that they come and tell us what they're asking from the district and what that looks like, so then we know what they're wanting to renew and pass contracts possibly, and if that's acceptable to it, you know what I mean? What's that process look
I'll
like?
let Aaron add to that, but I will say that the other thing that's happening at the same time. So we have this process to get us ready for discussions around budget, because we have to plan the budget now. So despite all of that we have, so they're talking about priorities, but they're also talking about these priorities having bargaining implications. So we are doing a complete bargain around our collective bargaining agreements. For renewal for both of our groups, and so those are all happening at the same time. if that makes sense. Aaron, I'll let you talk about that.
Yeah, specific to what you're asking, the contract is actually silent on that aspect. It doesn't say 2 weeks after, 5 days after. What it says is that the association has the opportunity to present their, what they believe to be true to the school board. So their recommendations to the board, I think, is the language of choose.
So they're gonna come with their recommendations to the board. Cause I'm just kind of thinking as a contract, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, with any contract out in the world, you go to your job and you're gonna say, okay, I want X amount for whatever I do, and I'm gonna get this percentage, and I wanna be protected here, and if that's what I'm asking, is are they coming to ask for that? And do they want additional, monies, additional, yeah, all that kind of stuff, what is that looking like for budget reasons, and also for, what does it cost? Cause I need a little help here, you're gonna have to walk me along. Here, because you guys are the pros and I'm not, so I'm going back here, I saw an example of 17 students per classroom that's in there, and so I'm assuming you're gonna have a teacher, maybe a paraeducator or something in there. What is Tukwila District following? You know what I mean? Do we have an outline of what we kind of, they're specific and special, okay, I can give room for that. But what's kind of the general, what we're trying to get to, do we have that in place? Does our union reps or union people agree with that? You know what I mean, that part of it. And if not, then how far off are we from there? Because we're talking about a reduction in force. I heard a couple keywords that we are overstaffed, different things. So what is that? What does that look like? I mean, I can't find that in here. You know what I mean? I need to better understand what that I don't know. And how do we get to that point of, and then I want to know also, if I'm going to be on a ask, is what are the past contracts with teachers and stuff like that? What are some things in the contracts that need to be looked at that are maybe unique to Tukwila, and not to other districts? I'm just curious about these things just so I can better understand, that. Final point, I really like the AVID presentation. And that presentation that came out here is stuck in my mind. So when we talk about going forward and different things, and we're talking about cuts, and of course I'm gonna lean on you guys that do the work day in and day out. You're gonna best understand what programs are working well better than I could ever do without, being in the classroom all day, following different things. Those things are super helpful. You know what I mean? To see things like that coming in. But I feel like you guys have a lot of good information. I just need the base bones. I just need to know where we're at, money wise, where our students are, for there. What's the expectation that's kind of a norm, not to be exact, right? What is Tukwila doing? And then, because we're not reinventing the wheel. I mean, there's other districts out there that are, performing and doing this. And so I'm just kind of curious about what that looks like. And I know that you're in negotiations, and now I've seen a timeline that's sped up, because we were talking about, it was May 15th, now we're May 6th, and so now it's even getting shorter, so I'm kind of just, I feel it's a little ambiguous to me, and maybe that's all, because we're in negotiations and we're doing stuff, and I'm not sure, so that's what I'm asking is, how can I better have the information so I can understand to make the best choice with the information you guys are presenting?
The plan is to have more of these, fortunately, we only have like an hour and a half, 2 hours. So the plan is to keep coming back, right? In February, we're gonna be coming back again. We are gonna be providing some of our recommendations. As we continue through, and we wanna make sure we meet these timelines and because these are all balancing acts. We just, the team and I already have looked at all of the budgets, and we've looked at all of the pieces, and we've identified some preliminary thinking around what we're looking at. We have to come back to the board. We can't do that without letting the board know exactly what it is we're recommending, right? And so you'll get that information, not today, but you will get that information. So that's why I wanted to make sure we went over the timeline, we went over the history, of what's happening, and then what our plan is moving forward, but it is. Like I said, I don't wanna sit here and say, oh, we're gonna, cut this percent out of this, because we haven't really had conversations with, I mean, even reviewing the board priorities, right? Like, the board has a list of priorities. That's a conversation that the board has to, now that you have this information, right? So what are your priorities? And we have new board members too. So after you learn some of this, right? What are your now, because those are priorities done with previous boards, that helps me actually as what I'm finessing some of these things. So if I know, for example, SEL is the number one thing that this board says, I have to find ways to prioritize SEL through any of those budgets. That's gonna help me, give me guidance so I can ensure that those things are protected to the best of my ability within the budgets confined with the constraints that we have. So I need that.
I agree, and I think then I think that that's important, that we need to get that work going, absolutely, because, and I need to know those, or I think we need to know what are those programs that are working,
Yes.
you know what I mean, that.
And also the ones that are not.
Yeah,
A lot of people come in and tell us all the good ones.
yeah.
Nobody comes tell us what.
Oh, we've talked about the past, like some of the
Yeah,
things,
okay.
yeah, we have, but that's okay, but I think we have that information. So
I mean, sometimes there's quality programs
yeah,
that just aren't working in our building.
yeah,
Like, I remember first moved into Tuckahoe.
Yeah.
And the principal giving me a tour and I saw the AP classes. AP is always nice. But there's like 2 kids in the class.
yes.
That's, AP works, but if you don't have kids in the class.
That was a conversation I actually had at Foster High School, right? When we were talking, because they were talking to me about, you know, what they needed and what they, and so we had to have that conversation around, all of these things are true, right? If you have a PE class of 40 kids, but you also have classes with 10 kids, how do we reimagine what the master schedule might have to look like? Because something's not working, right? So we have to figure that
I have
out.
another question, and this might not be the time, so you can just tell me we'll table it.
No, and we just, we have this place until 6 o'clock.
It's
So we're good.
it's
We're good for right now, yeah.
Eric's talking about.
Yeah.
So in the negotiation,
Mhm.
I initially saw from CFO, the pay scale.
Yeah.
For a teacher. Now, it's topic. So does the existing contract and the one reviewed in May prohibit us from cutting at the top? Because of seniority, I know there's some positions, but I mean, those are real conversations.
Yeah.
A lot of times it's the last hire first to go, but the big money's down at the bottom, at 55% of the salary. Is there language in the contract that protects that? Good question.
That protects that.
Yeah.
Yes.
So really, we don't even have access to cut where we can make the biggest, right?
And that, is that the 64, to play out with terms, is that the 64 certificate there? So within the 64, there's even less that are like the untouchables?
I would go within the 64, we're more heavy with provisional 1 and 2s, which are in their first 1 or 2 years of their career.
1 and 2 is 1, 2, and 3, okay.
Yeah, so there are a few provisional 3s that are on the bottom right. Yes.
But
Answer
as
that, your question.
Justin said, did I say Justin, you're right. We're gonna be cutting, saving the minimum mark
Yeah.
to the folks that'll be impacted the most.
But I would say, so something that we're doing, for example, so when we're thinking, and whatever, we have to follow our bargaining agreement.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
have to,
Yeah.
you know that, we have to follow that, whatever we agree to. However, one of the things we are doing is really trying to incentivize and actually create opportunities. Because what's really needed is that flexible, you know, when we're talking about all of us doing more, right? So what will it take for some of our educators, right, our bilingual educators, for example, to become teachers? Or so our bilingual paraeducators, or our paraeducators that are interested in doing special education, right, to become educators. Like, that would be something that we can build out. What is that dream for our workforce, right? Eventually in 3 to 5 years down the road, where we have more of our teachers dual cert to serve our students so that we're not supplementing with a lot of, you know, other staff, if we have teachers that can actually do some of that. Now, they won't be able to do all of it, but they definitely can do, if they're trained in the ELL strategies, if they're trained in the special education strategies, how do we build our workforce, right? And even our paraeducator workforce to actually, being able to serve the unique students that we have. So that's something we're working on too on the side. We're working on those.
I think that's long term.
Yeah, that's not, but I will say that the union has been working with us on that, so they're in partnership with us on that, and so we are working very closely with them because I think we all agree on what we want to get to. But that doesn't skirt the reality that we have some major things to do for this year and next year, because this isn't gonna be a 1-year thing, this is a 2-year plan. Because we're not gonna get at 6% for sure, we barely get at 0, you know, with the cuts that we have. Our goal is to make the cuts that we have, build our controls, be, adhere to our plan, as, you know, and then also continue to analyze where we are, right, in terms of enrollment and all of these pieces, and analyze our programs. And so that is harder work to do, because I was an educator, I will say 32 years now, 1992, whatever that is, I just dated myself. And those of us who've been here longer, and we know, it is really hard to let go of the things that we love. Even though our students change, right, our population changes, but I wanna say, it doesn't, I remember saying this once to a group of my teachers, we had I think I was an elementary principal, we had 150 multilingual learners moving, and I kept saying to the teachers, you're excellent teachers. We just need to learn some new skills. You know, it's just learning a new skill and learning new adaptive skills to work with the population that we have, and I think we have a lot of people here willing to do that. I really do.
We had an interesting, if you listen to Dennis talk, our school board rep, about when he came over from Vietnam, the issue of, you know, he comes into the system, he doesn't know how to speak any, and there was nobody at that time speaking Vietnamese. And so what happened, you know, a lot of those students traditionally have gotten pushed over into, you know, separate classrooms and so forth and so forth. And so if you start thinking about, suppose we had somebody here with the bilingual folks that could speak the language of the fifth, and then all of a sudden, you know, they don't need to go for remedial work and so forth. So that's, you know, one of the, you know, innovation and how you change the system.
And I think that's the hardest part for me with Dennis's story is to add on to that. He was brilliant in math, but he was treated like he wasn't, right? Because he didn't have a way to communicate that. Or the staff didn't have the skills to work with that, right? And so I think that is the other thing, is how do we ensure our children's brilliance is really supported.
And we also lost so much of his language.
Yes, and we lost his language in the process too.
Really.
But I think we have to make some changes, right? Significant changes, and we need to work together to be innovative, but it means we have to make some changes now.
So I think something that I've definitely heard from you too, and I know I've asked this a lot as well, and I think what would be beneficial as we start to talk about what priorities are, which will be, what date is that, February 13th? Yeah, I think is when we're having the discussion. Whatever the best way y'all feel like, the most appropriate way to get us a summary or the information about the programs that are and are not working. I think probably thinking about the most high cost programs, obviously the list would be really long if we did all of them. But I think we need to have some understanding of what your discoveries have been, even before we see the recommendations for what changes might need to be made, right? Because then, yeah, so whatever y'all feel like is the best way to get us that, whether it's in board meeting, presentation, or sending that to us, but I think that would be really helpful in, continuing.
Yeah, I think that starts to get at Director Simpson's correct request for what's in place now and working, not working, and how they staffed and all that.
And I want to say too, I also want to make sure that we're putting value statements on some things that people really love.
I mean, and with that in mind, I don't, but I'm open if we can make the schedule work.
Yeah.
To come to the school and show me. I'll walk through, you know, the pros and cons and the negatives. I'm with it. So we tell our principals and instructors that.
Yeah.
Some of the board directors would, I mean, I'd like to be able to see firsthand the impact of the
Yeah,
decisions
yeah.
we make.
All right, I have that.
Thank
information.
you.
Yeah, and I'll make sure that we get that somehow prior to the 13th, because I do think it'll be important for people to absorb it. I mean, everyone's style is different, but absorb it, read it, so then you can come in and ask the questions, yeah. All right, is there anything else, Amy and Ray, that you felt that you needed to present from your presentation that you felt kind of important?
No, I think everything that's on here, we've gone over either in previous board meeting or throughout the presentation today. If you have specific questions on any of those slides that maybe we didn't cover in detail, or if you want to reach out at a different time and ask questions on those, I'm more than happy, but I think we're just going over the same information at this point, unless there was a specific question you might have.
I just want to, because I keep hearing you say, 55% is budget, but is that 55% is salaries, but is that the 20% is also, so it's 75%, right? Is a person at 85 is what a period person costs us.
Yes. Yeah, and typically it's 85% of school districts.
So we're 75.
And we're at 75, so that is both salaries and benefits when we talk about that 75%.
And if I can float this out here, we were talking, Director Larson was talking about, we have to look and project what, particularly around enrollment, considering the southern border, but just so we're clear, the top 5 asylum seeker countries, Iraq, Myanmar, Somalia, or down somewhere, but Mexico,
Afghanistan, I remember back in Afghanistan.
Yeah. and Ukraine,
Ukraine.
and no, starts with a P. But there will be from the southern border, no, it's not. I already got it. I was gonna say, well, that's how it was. My point is, we should look, but University of Washington study says here are the top 5, and NPI study says similar. So it's Africa, Asia, and Ukrainian areas.
It's a little tricky because our current, if you did, where do the countries are the current top 5 that are in our district, which can be different from who's coming in right
Yeah,
now.
but we were talking about asylum seekers.
Correct.
And we're talking
Yeah.
about looking on the
Yeah.
horizon of what's gonna enroll at Foster, Showalter,
Yeah,
et
yeah.
cetera. If we, and some of the braided dilemma, I like that word. If you go to Jan's church.
Right.
And the asylum seekers there.
Yeah, it's Angola, Venezuela, yeah, right.
They're African, Asian.
Well, but it's different. I mean, Angola speaks Portuguese.
That's not, but my point is,
Yeah.
it's not the Mexican border.
Well, but they're coming through there. I think that's what's happening.
Again, I think we have to be wise enough to say that's what you mean. We have to say that's what we mean, because it becomes a different, assessment, because we're projecting what's it gonna come like. If you say from the southern border, you're projecting what the demographic and the next enrollment surge of asylum seekers.
Yeah, I'm actually not, because they're literally coming from all over the world.
Yeah, and they actually go come from right down the street at the INS building. What's that?
Yeah.
So I just want us to,
Yeah.
we should look on the horizon.
Right.
But we're gonna be making these ESL shows, we're gonna be making them multi-Islamic, we're gonna be making. We know it's an emotional. We're gonna have to gauge the emotional impact of COVID. Imagine gauging the emotional impact of COVID. The world dealt with COVID. From a young person that just came through 3 countries to get here. You think our kid down at community is impacted. So these are all variables, but it was said, I just want us to be clear, get it on the record. That there are reports out on what the biggest asylum seekers, and the numbers I gave were for the state of Washington, not.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So that's what's coming. We need to look at it, but we need to get out of here. Aaron, you was gonna say something.
So just to kind of wrap this up, again, I want to say thank you so much to you two for being here today. And thank you so much for, I know that this was just a lot of work to put together, so thank you for that. For fellow board members, so if you look down, it was one of the appendixes, and we'll have Deb send it out as well, but the current board budget priorities, they're very small on the PDF, so they're sideways. So you don't necessarily try to read them, we'll send them. But you'll notice that there's a lot of them. And how can we make really effective decisions when there's so many priorities? And so one of our goals is going to be really narrowing down and coming up with 2 or 3 priorities that are really gonna guide our decision making or guide their decision making around the budget. So what I encourage you all to do is just take a look at some of those things that's currently there, but also we're gonna start the conversation from nothing, right? So those can be reference points, but we're starting from scratch as far as like building what our board priorities are. But that might kind of give you some insight into how things have been, thought about or talked about before. And then as we continue in our budget conversations and budget meetings, if there's anything like specific, whether it's a really specific question that you want to get answered at one of the upcoming board reports, please let me know, let Dr. Berjosa know. A lot of the reports that are designed are around what folks have heard that we want, right? And so the more that we can be vocal about the things that we really need to see and hear, the more they can really fine tune the reports to make sure that we're getting the answers to those questions as much as possible in these board reports. So definitely let me know. Again, let Dr. Berjosa know what those things are. Because I want to make sure that you're also feeling like you're getting what you need with this continued like water hose of information.
And it is a lot, we recognize that too.
So while we're not able to do the board priorities until February 13th, the work is continuing to move. Just want to name that as well. So it's not as if everything is just waiting for those things to happen. But that is kind of the next step for us in this process.
So before February 13th, what should I expect to see? Well, you know what I mean, between now and then, what's gonna be coming to my email or coming to, from who, from what, from where? I just need to know who I can put a name on. And if it doesn't happen, because I know everyone's all busy, then I can come and say, hey, I need this, I haven't got this yet.
So we're gonna have, the next step is we're gonna have equity training, right? And then we're gonna have the budget meeting on the 13th, correct? And that's all gonna be here in this space.
And potentially before that though, when are we gonna get what I've kind of requested from y'all about
Yeah.
the summary? Is that
Well,
true?
the summary of the programs, so I heard it's programs.
Yes.
So I just sent, we're having to compile that, so we need a little time to compile. And I also have to get other things compiled as well, so I will meet with the team tomorrow, I'll set up, but it'll be probably in an email. Probably in like the weekly update, I'll send it to you for that, so that you can get it through that. Okay, but I just have to talk to them about it, I just sent them all an email right now. But saying, we need to sit down and assess how we're gonna do that, because we have schools, right, there's programs in schools, there's HR, there's all of these pieces, so we have to go through it all together.
And I don't expect it perfect, or, I'm not gonna.
No, I'm not.
Oh, yeah, I'm not gonna hold
not
you
a
to
big
it
deal.
like every single month, it's just, I gotta have something.
And I wanna be clear,
Yeah.
it's our view, right, about that, and there might be some disagreement that we'll use data to make our decisions, we'll look at data, we'll look at things, but like, if we've talked about, like, for example, I'll just say, we have one school that uses one assessment program. And they've been using it for years, and we have another one, and so it's time to, we've allowed it to continue, because of course, it's something that teachers like, but that's something that probably have to sunset. So things like that we actually have that information.
And I think too, again, use the data where you have the data, and if you don't have data, just be honest about that, right? You don't yet have the data, because I think we're also recognizing that this is a very new team, right, that's coming and really trying to uncover a lot of things, and
So I'll try to get that in an update, yeah.
The other question that I heard, I think you were asking for kind of things that are in the contract that
Correct.
might need to be examined.
I just wanna see what the current contract is, and
I mean, you can read the current contract, it's out there on the website, but a more succinct, yeah.
yes.
Right.
But I can send it as an attachment.
Which would be great, and then also, our staffing, what I heard was we have more staff, and then compared, I need a reference, guys, and I know that every district's unique, I'm gonna give everybody that leeway, you don't have to tell me that. But I just need a reference of what's kind of the norm, and then what are we doing, and I know there's reasons why, I just need to know what it looks like. I don't need the evidence of why we're doing it. I just wanna know what it looks like. That's it. And then we can discuss the evidence and everything, why we're doing it, the way we're doing it. Totally fine. I just need something, please, before we get together. Cause I hate coming to a meeting that we're spending the time and doing things that maybe I could have already had answered and then not taking up the time for other things that has to have happened, right? So that would be helpful. And then I would talk less and that would be good.
It's okay.
And if there are other things come up that you.
Yeah, we could just go back and
Yeah.
back and forth. for sure.
And just, the point of our work session is that to be learners, right, to learn the process and, yeah, we'll make sure and get you all of that. Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right, y'all, thank you so much. So we'll officially move to adjourn our meeting right at 6 o'clock. I need a motion. Second. All right, all in favor?
All right.
Thank you all so much for being here.
It was a pleasure. Very much.
Yeah.
Okay.